You think anyone in this city cares what happens to a fat, ugly waitress like you? Go ahead, scream, cry. Nobody's coming. Rick Dawson said it quietly. That was the worst part. Not shouting. Calm. Like it was simply the truth. Then he reached across the counter, took the folded bills a customer had left, specifically for Emily, tucked them into his own pocket, and walked away smiling, while she stood frozen red marks still burning on her wrist where he'd grabbed her. He had done this for months, and he had always been right. Nobody came. Until tonight, until the most feared man in Boston sat down in that corner booth and ordered coffee. If you've ever been treated like you were invisible, like your pain didn't matter, like the world would never fight for someone like you, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain came down hard on Boston that Tuesday night, the kind of rain that didn't care about umbrellas or intentions. It slapped against the windows of the Blue Lantern Diner and pooled along the gutters of Tremont Street in long, dark rivers that carried cigarette butts and candy wrappers toward the drains. It was the kind of rain that made the city feel smaller, quieter, more honest about what it really was, a place full of people trying to hold themselves together after midnight. Emily Carter had been on her feet for 11 hours. She had started her shift at 2 in the afternoon, taken a 30-minute break somewhere around 6, when the dinner rush slowed, and then gone straight back to the floor. When Rick called her name with that particular tone he used, not loud, never loud enough for others to hear clearly, just sharp enough to make her stomach tighten. She was 27 years old. She had brown eyes that people rarely looked at directly, and dark hair she kept pulled back because the health code required it, though she would have worn it down if she could. She had a round face that her mother once called beautiful and that her manager called unprofessional. She was plus size in a way that the world had spent her entire adult life reminding her of, as though she might have forgotten, as though she needed the constant education. She didn't need it. She knew exactly what she looked like. She just didn't agree that it mattered. But on a night like that Tuesday, with her lower back screaming and her feet numb inside her non-slip shoes and her apron stained from a soup spill that a customer had blamed entirely on her, Emily Carter didn't feel like arguing with the world about what mattered. She just needed to get through the shift. Table 4 needs a coffee refill, Rick said, not looking up from his phone at the counter. And someone spilled something near the bathrooms. Go clean it up. I've got 2 tables waiting on food, Emily said. Her voice was even. She had practiced keeping it even. Then you better move faster. He finally looked up. His eyes swept over her in that way, up down a small, dismissive exhale, and he said, and fix your hair. You look sloppy. Her hair was perfectly tucked under her cap. She said nothing. She went to table 4. Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks were regulars. Retired couple came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordered the same thing, always left a $5 tip no matter what. Mrs. Hendricks had told Emily once that she reminded her of her granddaughter, and Emily had held on to that compliment for 3 weeks. There she is, Mr. Hendricks said warmly. How are you holding up tonight, sweetheart? Doing just fine, Mr. Hendricks. Emily smiled and poured the coffee. Her hands were steady. She made sure they were steady. Mrs. Hendricks, can I get you anything else? Oh, we're good, honey. You look tired. Long day, Emily said simply. You work too hard, Mrs. Hendricks said, and she reached out and patted Emily's hand gently, the way a grandmother would, and Emily felt something shift dangerously in her chest, that particular pressure that builds when someone is kind to you at exactly the wrong moment. Thank you, Emily said. I'll check back in a few minutes. She walked to the back. She passed Rick on the way. I was now at the counter talking to Danny, the short order cook, laughing about something on his phone. As Emily passed, Rick glanced at the Hendricks' table, then back at her and said just loud enough, Hope you're not chatting up the customers again. You're here to serve food, not to make friends. I was refilling their coffee, Emily said. Do it faster next time. She kept walking. The kitchen smelled like fried onions and dish soap, and the back area near the supply closet was the only place in the entire diner that had no camera. Emily knew this because she had noticed about 6 months ago that the camera in that corner had been angled wrong, pointing at the ceiling rather than the floor. She had mentioned it to Rick once. He had told her to worry about doing her job. She wondered sometimes if the angling had been intentional. She picked up the order for tables 7 and 9, balanced the plates the way she'd learned in her first week, 3 plates on one arm, the coffee pot in her other hand, and headed back to the floor. The diner was about half full at that hour. That was typical for a Tuesday near midnight. And there were the regulars, a few college students with laptops and enormous headphones, two taxi drivers at the counter sharing a piece of apple pie, a woman in a green coat who came in alone every few nights and always ordered hot tea and scrambled eggs and never spoke to anyone. There were a few strangers passing through, a couple who looked like they'd been arguing, a man in a business suit who was typing furiously on his phone. Then the door opened. Emily was in the middle of setting down the plates at table 9 when the bell above the door rang and the cold air rushed in, and she didn't look up immediately because she was focused on making sure the eggs were in front of the right person. But she felt the change in the room. That was the only way she could describe it later. A change. Like when a room goes quiet in the way that isn't peaceful, the way that is actually more alert, more watchful, like every person in the space had taken a small, unconscious breath and held it. She looked up. A man was standing at the entrance, shaking rain off his coat. He was tall, not aggressively tall, but the kind of tall that meant he could see over most of the room without trying. He was somewhere in his early 40s with dark hair going silver at the temples and a face that had been handsome once and was still handsome now, just in a harder way. He wore a dark coat, well-tailored, the kind that cost money without announcing it. He looked around the diner with the specific calm of someone who had already assessed a room before they finished walking into it. Emily noticed that Danny, who had been calling out order numbers in his usual bored monotone, had gone completely quiet. She noticed that the two taxi drivers at the counter had both found sudden interest in their plates. She noticed that even Rick, who was at that moment coming out of the back hallway, stopped when he saw the man actually stop mid-step, like someone had pressed pause on him and then very carefully composed his expression before continuing him forward. "Mr. Moretti," Rick said. His voice had changed entirely. The casual authority was gone. Something else was there now. "I didn't know we weren't expecting." "I know," the man said. His voice was quiet. That was the thing about it. It was genuinely quiet, not artificially soft. The kind of quiet that meant he never needed volume. "I'm not here for anything special. Just a table, something to eat." Of course, absolutely." Rick was gesturing toward the best booth near the window, smiling in a way Emily had genuinely never seen him smile before. "Let me get I'll seat myself," the man said. He chose a corner booth, not the one Rick had pointed to, the one he chose himself with his back to the wall, in a clear view of the door. He sat down, unbuttoned the top button of his coat, and looked at the table with the focused expression of someone whose mind was somewhere else entirely. Rick came back to the counter where Emily was standing. His voice dropped to a hiss. "You, go take his order." "I'm already handling 7 tables," Emily said. "I don't care if you're handling 17. You go over there right now, you smile, you are polite, and you do not." He pointed his finger in a way that stopped, just short of touching her, "do anything embarrassing. Do you understand me?" Emily looked at him steadily. "I know how to do my job, Rick." She picked up a menu, though she doubted the man would need it, and walked to the corner booth. She stopped at the table and placed the menu down gently. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Emily. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man looked up from the table. And this was the moment Emily would think about later, not with dramatic clarity, not like a scene from a movie, but with the specific strange quality of moments that matter before you know they matter. He looked at her, not at her body, not at her uniform, not past her, at something more interesting. He looked at her face the way people used to before the world taught everyone to look elsewhere. "Coffee," he said, "black, and whatever your quietest table is. I think I already found it." "You did," she said. "I'll be right back." She brought the coffee. He ordered eggs and toast. Nothing elaborate, nothing that required any performance. He sat quietly and looked out the rain-slicked window, and Emily left him alone, because that was clearly what he wanted. She had 3 more tables to manage, a side work assignment she hadn't started, and a growing knot behind her right shoulder blade that had been there since morning. She moved through the floor with the efficiency of someone who had learned to conserve every motion, and she did not think about the man in the corner booth except to note when his coffee cup was low. It was about 40 minutes later when it happened. Emily was at the counter entering an order into the system when she heard Rick's voice from the direction of table 12. She didn't look up. At first, she was focused on getting the order right because the system had been glitching all night and losing items. "Told you 3 times already," Rick was saying. His voice had the specific edge he used on staff, not on customers. Emily looked up. I was talking to Jorge, the 17-year-old busboy who had started 2 weeks ago. Jorge was holding a plastic bin of dirty dishes, and his face had the frozen, wide-eyed expression of someone who was trying very hard not to show how small they felt. I didn't mean to, Jorge started. I don't care what you meant. I care what you did. And what you did was cost me 15 minutes of this table's time because you were standing around doing nothing like you always do. I was stocking the supply. When I'm talking, you don't talk. Rick stepped closer. That's your first problem. You think because you're allowed to be here that you get to explain yourself. Emily's hand stopped over the keyboard. She knew this script. She had been in Jorge's position more times than she could count. She also knew the calculation, the job, the bills, the specific math of whether saying something was worth what it would cost. She came around the counter. Rick, she said clearly, I need to talk to you about the system. It dropped 2 orders again. Rick turned. He looked at her with open irritation. I'm in the middle of something. I know, but if those orders don't get re-entered in the next 2 minutes, table 6 is going to wait 40 minutes and it's going to come out of your report. She kept her voice entirely professional, entirely about the operational problem, no challenge in it. Rick stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at Jorge. Clean that up and don't let it happen again, he said, and he walked toward the counter. Jorge exhaled. He looked at Emily and said very quietly, thank you. Go clock out if your shift is done, she said, and take the side exit. It's not raining as hard on that side. She didn't watch him leave. She went back to the counter and spent the next 3 minutes pretending to troubleshoot the system while Rick stood next to her explaining what she was doing wrong. And she listened with the particular skill she had developed over years, hearing everything, registering everything, not letting any of it show. At 11:47, table 3 asked for their check. Emily brought it over, thanked them genuinely, and watched them leave. Mrs. Hendricks tucked something under the sugar dispenser before she stood up, the $5 tip, the same as always. She gave Emily a small wave on the way out. Thank you, Emily said. Drive safe. She watched them go to the door, and she watched Mr. Hendricks hold it open for his wife, and she thought about her father in the hospital bed on the 3rd floor of St. Vincent's, 20 minutes away by bus. And she thought about the number the billing office had given her last week, $47,000. That was the remaining cost of the treatment after what the insurance had already refused, and she felt the familiar sensation of the weight pressing down, the enormous invisible weight she had been carrying so long, she sometimes forgot it was extraordinary. She cleared the table. She reached under the sugar dispenser. Her hand found nothing. She checked again. She lifted the dispenser itself. She looked on the floor. The $5 was gone. She stood up slowly and looked at the counter where Rick was now eating a piece of pie and scrolling through his phone. She thought about the moment she had been at the Hendricks' table they had left. She had turned away, and Rick had been nearby. She walked to the counter. Rick, she said, did you clear table 3? Someone had to, he said, not looking up. You were too busy playing social hour. There was a tip on that table. Was there? From the Hendrickses. They always leave. Emily. He put his phone down and looked at her with patient condescension, like she was a slow child asking about something obvious. Customers don't always tip, especially when their waitress is too busy running her mouth to actually do her job. Maybe tonight wasn't your best night. The diner had gone somewhat quiet. Not entirely. The college students still had their music. The woman in the green coat was still quietly eating her eggs, but the taxi drivers at the counter had stopped their conversation. Emily said very carefully, that money was mine. Property on my tables is my responsibility, Rick said. That's in the employee handbook, which you would know if you read it. He picked up his phone again. Now, if you're done with the dramatics, there's a table near the window that needs bussing. Emily stood there. She thought I could say something right now. I could say exactly what I know, what I've seen, what I've documented over the past 4 months. I have a notebook. I have dates. I have amounts. I could say it right now in front of everyone. But she thought about the $47,000. She thought about the doctor who had told her that her father's treatment needed to begin within the month or the window would close. She thought about what losing this job right now, without something else lined up, without a safety net, would mean for that number. She thought about how powerless she was, and she turned around and went to bust the table near the window. The man in the corner booth was still there. His eggs were half finished. His coffee cup was empty. He was not on his phone, not reading anything. He was just sitting quietly watching the room in that careful, unhurried way. Emily reached for his cup. "Can I refill that for you?" "Thank you," he said. She poured. She started to step back. "You've been on since early afternoon," he said. She paused. "Excuse me, your feet." He wasn't looking at her feet. He was looking at her face with that same direct attention from before. When someone's been standing more than 10 hours, they change how they distribute their weight. "You've been doing it since I got here." Emily didn't know what to say to that. "I'm fine," she said. "Is there anything else I can get you?" He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "Thank you, Emily." She walked back toward the counter. It was almost 1 in the morning when the thing happened that broke her. The call came through on her cell phone, which she wasn't supposed to have on the floor, but kept in her apron pocket on silent because the hospital had her number. She felt the vibration and glanced at the screen and saw St. Vincent's Medical Center and stepped quickly to the back hallway before answering. It was the billing office, not the nurse's station, the billing office calling at 1 in the morning, which meant the automated system had triggered an alert. The message was 3 sentences. The payment plan she had arranged was being discontinued because of a missed installment. The account had been flagged. If the balance was not addressed within 14 days, the treatment would be suspended pending financial review. She stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand. 14 days. She had $312 in her checking account. She had been saving. She had been so careful for so many months. $50 here, $100 there, hiding it in a coffee tin in her apartment because she didn't entirely trust the bank account. But Rick had been taking her tips for months. Not every time, not always, obviously, but consistently enough that she had been keeping track. She had calculated it once carefully in the notebook she kept under her mattress. Over 4 months, she estimated he had taken more than $800 from her. $800 that could have been in that coffee tin. $800 that would have kept the payment plan alive. She put her phone back in her pocket. She straightened her back. She walked back to the floor. She served 3 more tables. She smiled when she needed to smile. She refilled coffee and brought checks and said, "Of course," and right away, and have a wonderful night. And then at 1:17 in the morning, she walked into the kitchen on the pretense of picking up an order, and she let herself go into the small area near the supply closet where there was no camera. And she sat down on the floor and she pressed her hands over her face and she cried. Not a polite cry, not a controlled cry, the kind of crying that had been building for months for the tips taken and the insults absorbed and the shifts covered and the doctor's appointments missed and the notebook under the mattress and the coffee tin with the carefully counted bills, all of it coming out at once like pressure that had finally found a release. She tried to keep it quiet. She pressed both hands harder over her mouth. She thought about Jorge's face, about the Hendrixes leaving, about the billing office's automated voice. She shook with the effort of keeping herself contained in the body of a person who was holding too much. She didn't hear the kitchen door. She didn't hear the footsteps. The first thing she knew was a presence, not a sound exactly, just the shift in air that means someone else is nearby. And she dropped her hands from her face and looked up. And there was the man from the corner booth standing just inside the kitchen doorway, looking at her with an expression she could not immediately read. Emily scrambled to her feet. Her face was wet. She wiped it quickly with her apron. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I'm sorry, I'll go back. Please don't say anything to my manager. I just needed a minute. Hey," he said, just that, quiet and direct. She stopped talking. "Nobody's firing you," he said. "Take a breath." She took a breath. It was shaky and humiliating and real. He didn't look away. He didn't look uncomfortable. He just stood there with his hands in the pockets of his coat and gave her the room she needed. "I apologize," she said. "This is completely unprofessional." "You're a human being," he said. "You're allowed to have a terrible night." Something about the plainness of that statement, not dramatic sympathy, not performance, just a simple statement of fact cracked through the professional composure she had been maintaining for 11 hours. "It's not just tonight," she said, and then she stopped because she had not planned to say anything. He waited. "I'm sorry," she said again. "You don't need to hear this. I'll get back to work." "I'd like to hear it," he said, "if you want to tell me." She looked at him. She was very good at reading people. You had to be in this work after this many years. She was looking for pity, which she would have rejected immediately. She was looking for the particular expression of someone who was listening as a social performance while actually waiting for you to finish. She didn't find either. My name is Vincent Moretti, he said. I own this diner. The kitchen went very quiet. Emily stood completely still. I come in sometimes, he continued, when I can't sleep. I don't make a production of it. I just want a cup of coffee and a meal in a place that belongs to me. He looked at her directly. I've been coming here for 3 years, and tonight is the first time I've walked into my own kitchen. So you can imagine I'm curious about what's happening in here. Emily's mind was doing rapid calculations. Everything she had just said, everything that had happened in the last 4 hours, the notebook under her mattress, the billing notice on her phone, all of it recontextualizing simultaneously. She chose honesty, not because it was strategic, because she was too tired for anything else. Your manager has been stealing employee tips, she said, not just mine, everyone's. For months, he's been pocketing the cash from tables and telling us the customers didn't tip, or that the money was absorbed into a general fund, or just not explaining it at all and daring anyone to challenge him. She paused. I've been documenting it. I have dates, amounts, and the names of other employees it's happened to. I have 4 months of records. Vincent Moretti was very still. I haven't said anything, she continued, because I need this job. My father is sick. He needs a treatment that costs more money than I have, and the payment plan I set up just got flagged because I don't have enough in the account because of what's been taken from me. Her voice was steady now. The crying was over. What was left was something cleaner, harder, more clarified. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm making excuses for letting it happen. I'm not making excuses. I made a calculation, a very specific calculation about what I could afford to lose right now, and I decided I couldn't afford to lose this job more than I could afford to lose the tips. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. You said you have records, he said. Yes. How detailed? Very. When can you show me? Emily reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small spiral notebook, the one she'd been filling for 4 months. Neat handwriting, dates down one column, amounts in another, notes in the margin about what Rick had said, what witnesses had been present, what she had observed. She had not planned to bring it to work. She had slipped it into her apron that morning without entirely knowing why, the way you sometimes carry a thing, because some part of you knows you are approaching the moment you'll need it. She held it out. He took it. He opened it. He read it, not skimming, reading. And Emily watched his expression change from careful attention to something quieter and colder that she recognized as controlled anger. He read every page. When he closed it, he looked up. Go back to the floor, he said. Finish your shift. Don't say anything to Rick tonight. What are you going to? Finish your shift, he said again. Your father needs that treatment. That's going to happen. But right now, I need you to go back out there and be exactly who you've been all night. Who I've been, she said. What does that mean? For the first time, something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. Professional, he said. Careful, kinder than anybody deserved tonight. Emily looked at him. She thought about trust, about how little of it she had, how long it had taken to earn what she felt for the few people in her life who had kept it. She thought about the fact that this man was a stranger who had walked into her kitchen and was now holding 4 months of her most important documentation. She thought about the billing office's voice on the phone, 14 days. She thought about her father's face the last time she visited, the way he apologized for being sick, the way she told him to stop apologizing. Okay, she said. She took her apron, straightened it, wiped her face one more time with the back of her hand, and walked back out to the floor. Vincent Moretti stood alone in the kitchen for a moment. He looked down at the small spiral notebook in his hand. Then he took out his own phone and made a call. It rang twice. Marcus, he said quietly, I need you to run a full audit on the Blue Lantern tonight, not tomorrow, right now. Pull the accounts, pull the security footage, all of it, and find out what my manager there has been doing with the tips register. A pause. Yes, tonight. He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen for another moment. I thought about the woman who had just walked back out to the floor. The woman who had been enduring this alone for 4 months, who had kept a notebook, who had done the math on what she could afford to lose and chosen to stay anyway, not for herself, but for her father. He thought about the way she had looked when she offered him that notebook, not hoping for sympathy, not performing vulnerability, but simply handing him the truth because she had decided in that moment that the truth was the only thing she had left to give. He had been in business for 20 years. He had met liars and loyalists and people who fell in every possible space between. He knew with the specific certainty of someone who had built an empire on reading human beings accurately that Emily Carter was the rarest kind of person, the kind that stayed honest when it cost them. He walked back out of the kitchen. He returned to his corner booth. Emily was refilling coffee for the woman in the green coat, talking to her quietly about something, and the woman who never talked to anyone was actually answering. Emily moved to the next table and the next, and anyone watching would have seen only a competent waitress working the floor in the deep quiet of a Tuesday night diner. Nobody would have seen the woman who had just decided to trust a stranger with the only weapon she had. Vincent Moretti sat in his corner booth until the rain started to ease. He did not look at his phone. He thought about the notebook. He thought about the amount, $800 over 4 months, and the way that number must have looked inside her coffee tin, counted and recounted until the night when it wasn't enough. I thought about Rick Dawson, who had been running his diner for 2 years and who had just without knowing it made the most significant miscalculation of his professional life. Rick came by the booth around 2 in the morning to refill his coffee, personally a performance Vincent found tiresome. "Everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Moretti?" Rick asked with his best smile. "Everything's fine," Vincent said. "Anything you need, you just say the word." "I will," Vincent said. Rick walked away. Vincent looked across the diner to where Emily was at the counter entering a final order into the system. She glanced up briefly and, for just a moment, their eyes met. She looked away first, but not before he saw it, not relief, not gratitude, not the expression of someone waiting to be rescued. Resolve. The expression of someone who had been waiting for a long time for the world to be fair and had decided tonight to bet on the possibility that it could be. Vincent Moretti finished his coffee. He left his table, clean his cup, empty, and under the edge of the saucer, folded flat, he left a $50 bill. Not for the service, for the woman who had shown him something about his own business that he had failed to see for 2 years, and that he told himself as he walked out into the rain was the least he owed her. The bell above the door rang as he left. Emily looked up from the counter. The corner booth was empty. She walked over to clear it. She found the 50. She stood there for a moment looking at it. Then she folded it, put it in her apron pocket, and went back to work. There were still 3 tables on the floor. Her shift didn't end for another hour. And whatever was coming, whatever Vincent Moretti had set in motion with that phone call, she would face it the same way she faced everything. On her feet, eyes open. Ready, the $50 bill was still in Emily's apron pocket when her shift ended at 3 in the morning. She had touched it twice without meaning to, once when she reached for her order pad, once when she was clearing the last table near the window. Both times she had pulled her hand back quickly, like the bill was something that needed to be treated carefully, like touching it too much might change what it meant or didn't mean. She didn't know what it meant. That was the problem. She had worked in service long enough to know that rich men sometimes tipped extravagantly for reasons that had nothing to do with the person they were tipping. It could be guilt. It could be performance. It could be the specific generosity of someone who would never feel the weight of $50 and therefore gave it the way other people gave pennies. She had learned a long time ago not to assign meaning to money left on a table. But Vincent Moretti had not left the money on the table. He had placed it under the saucer, folded flat, deliberately hidden like he didn't want Rick to see it before she did. That was different. She changed out of her uniform in the employee bathroom, put on her street clothes, jeans, a gray sweater that had been washed enough times to feel like a second skin, and walked out through the back entrance because the front door stuck in the rain, and she didn't have the energy to fight it. The night was still wet, but quieter now. The heavy rain had settled into a thin, persistent mist that caught the orange light of the street lamps and made everything look slightly unreal. She pulled her jacket tighter and started the 4-block walk to the bus stop. She thought about the notebook. She had given it to him without even thinking about making a copy first, and that realization hit her somewhere around the 2nd block and made her stop walking for a moment. 4 months of documentation. Every date, every amount, every comment Rick had made when he took the money. She had written it all down in her careful, small handwriting because she had learned from her father, who had been a machinist for 30 years and kept logs of everything, and that facts written down were different from facts only remembered. They had weight. They had precision. They couldn't be gaslit away. She had handed that notebook to a stranger who owned the diner, a stranger whose last name people said with a particular kind of careful tone. She started walking again. The bus was 8 minutes late, which meant she stood in the mist for 8 minutes thinking about every possible version of tomorrow. In one version, Vincent Moretti had forgotten her entirely before he reached his car. In another, he had handed the notebook to Rick the moment he left, and Rick was currently figuring out exactly how to make her life impossible. In another, the one she was least willing to believe because hope was expensive, something actually happened. She got on the bus. She sat in the second row near the driver, the way she always did at 3 in the morning, because her mother had taught her that, and some lessons stayed even when the person who taught them was gone. She texted her friend Carla, who always waited for the "I'm on the bus" text no matter what time it was. Carla responded immediately, "How bad tonight?" Emily thought about that for a moment. "Different," she typed back. "Good different or bad different?" Emily looked out the window at the wet city moving past. "I don't know yet," she typed. "I'll tell you tomorrow." She got home at 3:47. She lived in a 2-room apartment on the 4th floor of a building that had a broken elevator and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests on a timeline that could only be described as geological. The apartment was small and clean and completely hers. She had made it that way deliberately because she spent so much of her life in spaces that belonged to other people. She took off her shoes at the door. She put the kettle on. She sat at her small kitchen table and took the $50 bill out of her apron and set it in front of her and looked at it. Then she reached under the mattress in her bedroom. She had to move the corner of the box spring, slide her hand all the way to the center, and pulled out the coffee tin. She opened it. She counted what was inside. $340. The $312 from her account plus the $28 she'd collected in tips tonight before Rick got to the rest of them, plus the $50 from Vincent Moretti's saucer. She had added the $50 without deciding to. It felt like the right place for it. $340, 14 days. She put the tin back. She made her tea. She sat down and stared at the wall for a while, which was something she did sometimes when the numbers didn't add up, and she needed her brain to stop trying to solve the problem and just acknowledge it. Her father's name was Thomas Carter. He was 58 years old. He had worked construction for most of his life, framing houses, laying foundation, doing the physical work that built the neighborhoods of a city that never thanked him for it. His hands were permanently calloused, and his lower back had been bad for a decade, and he laughed too loudly at his own jokes. And he had raised Emily alone after her mother died when Emily was 11, and he had done it with the specific, unglamorous devotion of a man who showed up every single day regardless of whether he felt like it. The illness had come on quietly, the way serious things sometimes do. What he had thought was fatigue turned into something the doctors needed 8 weeks and 4 specialists to name. What they named it was manageable, genuinely manageable. Not the polite fiction doctors sometimes offered, but the treatment was expensive and the insurance had found 17 different reasons not to cover it fully. And Thomas Carter had spent 30 years doing work that didn't provide the kind of insurance that covered the thing that was currently trying to kill him. Emily had not told him about the payment plan being flagged. She would not tell him. He worried about her more than he worried about himself, which was typical of him and maddening, and she had learned to manage the information she gave him carefully. She finished her tea. She washed the cup. She went to bed. She did not expect to sleep, but she did the deep, heavy sleep of genuine exhaustion. And when her alarm went off at 8 in the morning, she lay still for a moment and listened to the sounds of the building. The elevator that didn't work, the neighbor's television, the pigeons on the fire escape, ordinary sounds. The sounds of a day that had not yet decided what kind of day it was. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers at 8 in the morning were either wrong numbers or the specific category of call that meant more bad news, and she had already hit her quota for bad news in the last 12 hours. But something, the same instinct that had made her slip the notebook into her apron yesterday morning, made her answer. Emily Carter. The voice was a woman's, professional, efficient, not unkind. Yes. My name is Sandra Reyes. I'm calling on behalf of Vincent Moretti. He'd like to meet with you this morning if you're available. 10 o'clock at the Blue Lantern. He said to tell you the diner will be closed to the public for the morning. Emily sat up. He wants to meet at the diner, she said. Yes. With Rick there, a brief pause. Mr. Dawson will not be present. Emily processed that for a moment. All right, she said. I'll be there. She arrived at 9:55. The closed sign was on the door, which she had never seen on a Tuesday morning. The Blue Lantern was a 24-hour diner, and the sign had always been purely decorative, kept behind the counter for emergencies that never seemed to come. She knocked, and a man she didn't recognize opened the door. He was large, quiet, and wore an expression of professional blankness that told her he was there specifically to project an absence of threat. She walked in. The diner was strange without customers. Without the noise and the movement and the particular energy of people who needed things, the space felt larger and more honest, like a theater scene from the stage rather than the seats. The chairs were still on some tables from the overnight cleaning, and the morning light came through the front windows without the usual competition of neon signs and phone screens. Vincent Moretti was at the corner booth. His booth, she was already thinking of it as. He was wearing different clothes than the night before: dark jacket, open collar, but had the same quality of stillness, the same sense of someone who occupied exactly as much space as he intended and not a fraction more. There was a woman at the table across from him, mid-40s, short dark hair, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a laptop and two folders arranged in front of her. She looked up when Emily walked in. "Emily," Vincent said, "sit down. Thank you for coming." She sat. She didn't take the chair directly across from him. She took the one at the end of the table, a small assertion of independence that she didn't fully analyze until later. "This is Diana Cho," Vincent said. "She handles my internal investigations." Diana Cho nodded once briskly. "Miss Carter, the records you provided last night were extremely thorough." "You've had them for 6 hours," Emily said. "I work fast," Diana said, not boastfully, just as a statement of fact. Vincent leaned forward slightly. "What we found confirmed everything you documented, and then some." He paused. "Rick Dawson has been skimming employee tips for 14 months. Not 4, 14. Emily felt that number land in her chest like a stone. 14 months, she said. He developed a system early on. He identified which employees were most likely to stay quiet: people with immigration concerns, people in difficult financial situations, people who didn't have other options. He targeted them specifically. Vincent's voice was calm and even, but there was something underneath it that wasn't calm at all. "You weren't the only one keeping records. One of your coworkers, I won't name them yet, has been doing the same thing separately, without knowing you were doing it." "Maria," Emily said immediately. Then she stopped herself. "I shouldn't assume." "It was Maria," Diana said. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. Maria Vasquez had been at the Blue Lantern for 3 years. She was a single mother with 2 kids in elementary school, and she made the best coffee on the floor. And she had covered Emily's section twice when Emily had needed to step out for a doctor's call and had never once asked for anything in return. "Is she okay?" Emily asked. "She will be," Vincent said. "But what Rick was doing goes beyond the tips." Diana opened one of the folders. "He's been using the diner's accounts to run a secondary operation. Specifically, he's been allowing certain individuals to use the Blue Lantern as a pickup point for, I'll be direct, Miss Carter cash that needed to move without documentation. He took a percentage. He's been doing it for over a year." Emily stared at her. "Through my diner," Vincent said. His voice hadn't changed pitch at all. That was almost more frightening than if it had. "He was careful," Diana continued. "He kept it small enough to avoid triggering automatic flags. But when Mr. Moretti asked for a full audit, it came apart very quickly." She closed the folder. "Mr. Dawson has been contacted this morning by our legal team. He will not be returning to this property." Emily sat with that for a moment. "What does this mean for the other employees?" she asked. "For Maria. For the people who are having their tips taken. Every documented instance of theft will be repaid," Vincent said. "With interest." "With interest," Emily repeated. "It's the least owed," he said simply. "And my father's treatment." She said it directly without softening it because she had spent all night deciding that if she was going to be in this conversation, she was going to be fully in it. The payment plan was flagged, 14 days. Vincent looked at her steadily. "That's being handled today." "I don't want charity," she said immediately. Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, but a recalibration. "What I'm repaying you is money that was taken from you," he said. "That's not charity. That's a debt. And my father's treatment is a separate thing." "Yes. So I want to know exactly what you mean by handled." There was a short silence. Diana had gone carefully still in the way that people go still when they're watching something they find interesting. "I have a foundation," Vincent said, "medical assistance. It operates independently of my business interests. It's funded and it functions and it doesn't ask for anything back. Does it exist or are you creating it right now to tell me about it? Emily asked. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost. It exists, he said. Diana can send you the documentation. The IRS filings, the board membership, the grant history, everything public. I'd like to see that before I make any decision, Emily said. Of course, Diana said, and she typed something on her laptop. Emily's phone buzzed. An email. She opened it and saw exactly what Diana had said, documentation filings history. She didn't read all of it at that table. She would read all of it later. But she looked at enough to confirm it was real, and that took about 90 seconds. All right, she said. All right, Vincent said. Another silence, different from the first one. The first silence had been negotiation. This one was something being settled. I want to ask you something, Vincent said. Okay. You kept those records for 4 months. You watched him take money money that your father needed, and you documented it instead of reporting it. Why, I told you last night I couldn't afford. I know what you told me, he said. I'm asking what you were actually planning to do with a notebook full of evidence. Because that's not the behavior of someone who's just surviving. That's the behavior of someone who intends to do something. Emily looked at him. He was right. She had known he was right the moment he said it. I was waiting, she said, for a moment when I had enough saved that losing this job wouldn't mean my father lost his treatment. I was going to reach a number. I had a number, and then I was going to walk into whatever office I needed to walk into and put that notebook on the desk and let someone else deal with it. What was the number? $5,000. How close were you? 340. He didn't react to that the way most people would have. He didn't perform outrage or sympathy. He just received it the way he seemed to receive everything, completely without theater. He almost won, Vincent said. Not to Emily specifically, almost to himself. He almost ran out the clock. Yeah, Emily said, he almost did. The door of the diner opened. The large, quiet man who had let Emily in stepped aside, and Emily turned to see 2 people walk in, Maria Vasquez and Jorge, the 17-year-old busboy. They both stopped when they saw the diner, saw Vincent, saw Emily, and the expressions on their faces went through rapid changes that Emily recognized as the same sequence she had gone through: confusion, fear, calculation, and then a fragile, uncertain hope. Please sit down, Vincent said. Both of you. Maria looked at Emily. Emily nodded slightly. They sat. Vincent looked at all 3 of them, Maria, Jorge, Emily, and said, I owe each of you an apology. This is my business. What happened in it was my responsibility, and I didn't know because I wasn't paying close enough attention. He paused. That's not an excuse. It's an explanation, and there's a difference. Maria was very still. Will we still have jobs? She asked. Her voice was careful and controlled, but Emily could hear what was underneath it. Yes, Vincent said, if you want them. With different management, Maria said. It was not quite a question. Completely different management, Vincent said. Effective today. Jorge had not said anything. He was sitting slightly forward, his hands flat on the table, and he was looking at Vincent with the concentrated attention of someone absorbing every detail. He looked like he was trying to decide something. Can I ask something? Jorge said. Go ahead, Vincent said. How did you find out what actually happened last night? Vincent glanced at Emily, just briefly. A question. Emily gave a small shrug. It wasn't her story to hide. Emily was in the kitchen, Vincent said. I went in. She told me the truth. Jorge looked at Emily. His expression was complicated gratitude and something older than gratitude. Something that recognized what honesty cost. He grabbed her wrist last week, Jorge said, when she tried to call him out about the tips. I saw it. I should have said something. I didn't. You're 17, Emily said. It wasn't your job to fix it. It wasn't yours either, he said, but you did. The table went quiet. Diana cleared her throat gently and began explaining the specifics, the repayment process, the timeline, the new management structure she was already building. Emily listened and took out her phone and made notes, because that was what she did. She documented. Some habits were worth keeping. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When it ended, Maria hugged Emily in the parking lot, hard, wordless. The kind of hug that didn't need explaining. Jorge lingered for a moment near the door, and Emily thought he was going to say something, but instead he just gave her a nod. The specific nod of someone who has decided to be a certain kind of person going forward and is marking the moment internally. She understood it completely. Vincent walked her to the sidewalk, just a few steps, not an escort, not a performance. Just the natural movement of a conversation that wasn't quite finished. The foundation will contact St. Vincent's directly, he said. You don't need to go through the billing office again. Thank you, she said. She meant it plainly without decoration. He nodded. He was about to turn back toward the diner. Can I ask you something, Emily said. He stopped. Last night when you found me in the kitchen. She chose her words carefully. You didn't have to come back there. Most people in your position would have just had someone else deal with it. Sent a manager, sent an email. Why did you come back there yourself? He was quiet for a moment. I heard you, he said. Heard me what? Crying. He said it simply without any self-consciousness. I heard you and I followed it because he paused, and this was the first time Emily had seen him pause while speaking, actually searching for words, because that kind of crying means someone has been carrying something alone for too long. I know what that sounds like. Emily looked at him. She wanted to ask more. She didn't. Okay, she said. Thank you, again. She walked to the bus stop. She did not look back, but she thought the entire ride home about what he had said. I know what that sounds like, the specific knowledge in it, not the general sympathy of someone who had heard about suffering, but the particular recognition of someone who had produced that sound themselves. She thought about the empire everyone said he had built through fear. She thought about the man who had sat in a corner booth at 1 a.m. because he couldn't sleep. She thought about the way he had read every page of her notebook. She got home and called her father. He answered on the second ring the way he always did, as though he had been waiting. Hey, baby girl, he said. His voice was slightly thinner than it used to be, but it was still his voice, still had the warmth she had been hearing her whole life. Hey, Dad. She sat down on her couch. How are you feeling today? Better than yesterday, he said, which means good. A pause. You sound different. Different how? Lighter, he said. Something happened. She thought about how to answer that. She thought about the notebook and the $50 in the corner booth, and the 2 hours in a closed diner, and what Diana Cho's laptop had contained, and what Vincent Moretti had said about knowing what a certain kind of crying sounded like. Something happened, she said. I'll tell you all of it when I come visit. But Dad, the treatment, it's going to happen. Silence. Emily, it's taken care of, she said. For real, not almost. For real. She heard him exhale. It was a long, slow exhale, the release of something he had been holding for a very long time, something he had never let her hear him hold, but which had apparently been there all along. I don't know how I'll tell you everything when I come. Wednesday. I'll bring the bad coffee you like. He laughed. It was real. It was his real laugh, too loud at his own joke, and she had not heard it in 3 months, and it filled her small apartment completely. I love you, baby girl, he said. I love you too, Dad, she said. Get some rest. She hung up. She sat on her couch for a long time. She thought about the $47,000, about the coffee tin under the mattress, about the 14 days that were no longer a countdown. She thought about Maria's hug and Jorge's nod and Rick Dawson's name being in the past tense and the specific silence of the corner booth after Vincent Moretti decided something. She should have felt relief. She did feel relief. But underneath the relief was something else, something she hadn't expected and wasn't entirely sure she trusted. The sense that this was not the end of something, that it was for reasons she couldn't fully articulate the beginning. She pushed it away. She was tired. She needed sleep and food and probably a conversation with Carla that lasted 2 hours. She needed normal things. She made herself a sandwich. She watched 40 minutes of television without processing any of it. She fell asleep on the couch and woke up at 4 p.m. to her phone buzzing on the cushion beside her. Diana Cho's number, she answered. Miss Carter, I wanted to update you. The Medical Foundation has been in contact with St. Vincent's billing department. The account has been flagged for assistance. You should receive a confirmation call directly from the hospital within the hour. Thank you, Emily said. She was still half asleep. She sat up and ran her hand over her face. There's also something else. Diana's voice shifted slightly, just slightly, but Emily caught it. During the audit this morning, we found something in Rick Dawson's private files that we weren't expecting. Emily went still. What kind of something? The individuals using the diner for their cash operation, the people Rick was working with, they've been identified. And one of them has been monitoring this location more closely than we realized. A pause. Mr. Moretti wanted you informed before you heard anything secondhand. These individuals are aware that the operation was exposed. They don't yet know how. Emily sat up fully now. What does that mean for me? She asked. Probably nothing, Diana said. Mr. Moretti's security team is managing it, but we wanted you to know. Probably nothing, Emily repeated. You'll be watched over, Diana said. And then slightly more quietly, Mr. Moretti was very specific about that. The call ended. Emily sat on her couch with the phone in her hand and looked at the middle distance of her small apartment and felt the floor of the situation she was in shift slightly beneath her. A tectonic adjustment, small enough that someone not paying attention might have missed it, but large enough to change the whole landscape. She had walked into a diner last night to serve coffee. She had cried in a kitchen. A man had found her there. And somewhere between that moment and this one, her ordinary, terrible life had intersected with something much larger than she had understood, and the intersection had consequences she was only beginning to see the shape of. She thought about what Vincent had said. I know what that sounds like. She thought about the empire built through fear and the man who couldn't sleep in the corner booth with a cup of black coffee and the eyes that looked at her face directly. She thought, who are you, really? And she thought, I think I'm going to find out whether I want to or not. Her phone rang again. The hospital confirming the account status had been updated. The billing coordinator sounded confused in the professional way of people whose systems have been altered by forces they don't entirely understand. But the information was correct, the account was current. The treatment was authorized. The first session could be scheduled as soon as her father was ready. Emily thanked her. She hung up. She went back to her bedroom, reached under the mattress and pulled out the coffee tin. She opened it. She looked at the $340 inside. She put the lid back on. She put the tin back in its place. The money stayed where it was, not because she didn't need it, not because everything was suddenly fine, but because something had shifted in how she understood what it represented. It was no longer a countdown to catastrophe. It was something else now, a foundation, a small, solid thing she had built herself dollar by dollar in the dark when no one was watching. She was still the woman who had cried on a kitchen floor at 1 a.m. She was still the woman with the bad back and the 11-hour shifts and the landlord who didn't fix anything. But she was also the woman whose notebook had taken down a man who thought he was untouchable. And somewhere in the city, in a corner office, or a car moving through rain-wet streets, or a room she'd never seen, Vincent Moretti was dealing with something that had started in his own kitchen in a building he owned because a waitress he had never spoken to had kept a record of every wrong done against her and had been waiting patiently for the right moment to hand it to someone who could do something with it. She did not know yet what the people who had used Rick Dawson's arrangement would decide to do when they realized the operation was gone. She did not know yet what it meant that Vincent Moretti had said she would be watched over and that he had been specific about it. She did not know yet what it meant that a man who had built his life on never being vulnerable had walked into a kitchen because he heard a woman crying and stayed there until she was ready to speak. What she knew was this: she had made a bet on the truth when it cost her everything she had. And so the truth was paying. She got up, she washed her face, she put on her shoes, she had a hospital visit to make. Her father was waiting. Thomas Carter cried when Emily told him. Not the kind of crying he would have allowed her to see before he had spent years protecting her from his fear. The same way she had spent years protecting him from hers. Two people in the same family, both carrying enormous weight and both pretending, for the other one's sake, that the weight was manageable. But when she sat down in the chair beside his hospital bed on Wednesday afternoon and told him that the treatment was authorized, that the account was current, that the first session could be scheduled as soon as he was ready, something in Thomas Carter's face simply gave way. He turned toward the window. He pressed his mouth together. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then he got himself back under control the way men of his generation did, through sheer will and the particular stubbornness of someone who had decided long ago that falling apart was a luxury he couldn't afford. Dad, Emily said softly. I'm fine, he said. His voice was rough. Give me a second. She gave him a second. She sat and waited and looked at his hands on the blanket, the calloused, permanently scarred hands of a man who had built things his whole life. And she thought about the coffee tin and the notebook and the corner booth and everything that had led to this specific Wednesday afternoon. He turned back to her. His eyes were red. He didn't comment on that. How did you do it? He asked. I'll tell you everything, she said. But first, are you ready? Do you want to call the doctor today? Emily. Dad, how did you do it? He said again, not a question this time. She told him. Not everything. She left out the parts that would make him worry, specifically the part about Rick grabbing her wrist and the part Diana Cho had said about people monitoring the location and being aware the operation was exposed. She told him the parts that were true and safe, the notebook, the meeting, the foundation, the audit. She told him about Maria and Jorge. She told him about the corner booth and the cup of black coffee. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. This man, Thomas said. Vincent Moretti. Yes, I know that name. Emily stayed very still. Construction, he said. When I was working the Southside project must have been 12 years ago. The developer who owned the land, one of the subcontractors, whispered that name in connection with the financing. He paused. The kind of name you hear once and don't repeat. Dad, I'm not saying anything bad, he said quickly. I'm just saying I know what that name means in this city. He looked at her directly. Are you safe? Yes, she said, and she meant it as far as she knew it. Yes, I'm safe. He studied her face for a long moment with the specific attention of a man who had been reading his daughter's expressions for 27 years and knew every variation. Okay, he said, finally. Okay. He reached out and took her hand and squeezed it once hard. You are the most stubborn person I have ever known. I wonder where I got that, she said. He almost smiled. Your mother, he said. They called the doctor together. The session was scheduled for the following Monday. Thomas held the phone himself and spoke to the nurse in his clear, steady voice, and Emily sat beside him and breathed for what felt like the first time in months. She took the bus home in the early evening through streets that were still damp from the previous night's rain, and she felt hollowed out in the particular way that follows prolonged tension. Not empty, but lighter, like a bag that has been carrying too much and has finally been partially unpacked. Her phone buzzed at 6:47, unknown number. Different from Diana Cho's number, she answered. Silence for a moment, then a voice she didn't recognize, male flat with the specific quality of someone choosing their words with deliberate care. You should be more careful, the voice said, about who you talk to, about what you hand over to people you don't know. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Who is this, she said. Someone who wants you to understand something. A pause. What happened at the Blue Lantern, that's not finished. And people who get in the middle of things that aren't their business have a way of finding out that the middle is the most dangerous place to be. I don't know what you know exactly what I'm talking about, the voice said. Be smart, stay quiet. This goes away if you stay quiet. The call ended. Emily stood on the sidewalk outside her building and did not move for 30 seconds. Then she went inside, climbed 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was still broken, went into her apartment, locked the door, and called Diana Cho. Diana answered on the first ring. Someone just called me, Emily said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Unknown number. Male voice. He told me to stay quiet, that things that aren't my business have a way of getting dangerous. Silence on Diana's end. Not a surprise silence. A calculating one. How long ago, Diana asked. 4 minutes. Are you home? Yes. Lock your door. Don't leave tonight. I'm going to make a call, and someone will be outside your building within 30 minutes. A pause. I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. Mr. Moretti was concerned this might happen. He knew this might happen, Emily said, before he told me this morning that it was probably nothing. He hoped it was probably nothing, Diana said carefully. There's a difference. There really isn't, Emily said. Another pause. No, Diana said quietly. I suppose there isn't. I'm sorry. Emily ended the call. She sat on her couch in the specific stillness of someone who is processing something too large to process all at once and is therefore processing it in pieces. She thought about the voice on the phone, the flatness of it, the deliberate calm. She thought about what Rick had actually been running through the diner and the people connected to it, and the fact that those people now knew that something had gone wrong and were trying to figure out how. She thought about her father in his hospital bed, his scheduled appointment on Monday, his calloused hands on the blanket. She thought, I did not ask for this. And then she thought, I also didn't ask for Rick Dawson to steal $800 from me. I didn't ask for my father to get sick. I didn't ask for the insurance company to find 17 reasons to say no. I didn't ask for any of the things that had been done to me. The things that happen to you are not always your choice. What you do with them is. She got up. She went to her kitchen. She made dinner pasta simple, the kind of meal she made when she needed the ritual of cooking to settle her mind. She ate it at her small table. She washed her dishes. At 7:43, her buzzer rang. She went to the intercom. Ms. Carter, a woman's voice. My name is Petra. I'm with Mr. Moretti's security team. I'm going to be outside tonight. Emily pressed the intercom. Come in, third floor 402. I'll stay in the hallway, Petra said. You don't need to do anything. I'm just here. Emily stood at her door for a moment after the intercom went silent. Then she went back to her couch and picked up her phone and called Carla. Carla answered before the second ring. Okay, you said different and then went quiet for 2 days, so I need everything right now. Emily started talking. She talked for 45 minutes. Carla interrupted 12 times, mostly with variations of, wait back up, and he did what? And once memorably, Emily Ann Carter, you gave a mafia boss your secret notebook in a kitchen at 1 in the morning, and you led with something different happened. I didn't know I suspected he was someone important. Hi is the someone important in this city, Carla said. My cousin's boyfriend works at a restaurant on Beacon Street, and they get nervous just hearing the name Moretti. He seemed, Emily tried to find the right word, normal, like a person. Powerful people always seem like people, Carla said. That's what makes them powerful. A pause and her voice softened. Are you scared? Yes, Emily said, but not of him. That's the thing. The call tonight scared me, but when I think about Vincent Moretti, I don't feel afraid. What do you feel? Emily thought about that for a genuine moment. Seen, she said finally, which is so much worse in some ways. Carla was quiet for a beat. Yeah, she said. Yeah, it is. The next morning, Emily woke to 3 missed calls from Diana Cho and a text that said, call me when you're up, update. She called at 7:15. Rick Dawson met with someone last night, Diana said without preamble. One of the individuals connected to the cash operation. They're trying to establish how the audit was triggered and who provided information. Do they know it was me? Emily asked. Not yet. They suspect it came from inside the accounting system, which is a reasonable assumption and one we're allowing them to keep for now. A pause. But Ms. Carter, there's something else. Rick is claiming that the tips issue was a misunderstanding. He's preparing to file a wrongful termination suit. Emily laughed. It came out short and sharp and genuine. A wrongful termination suit. His attorney contacted our legal team this morning, Diana said. They're citing the audit as retaliatory. They're claiming the records were fabricated. He's claiming my records were fabricated, Emily said. Yes. I have 4 months of... I know what you have, Diana said. So does our legal team. This is a delay tactic, Ms. Carter. It's not a real threat. But it does mean that your documentation is going to be central to the response, and we need to go through it formally. A pause. Are you willing to sit with our legal team today? Yes, Emily said. Tell me where and when. She was at the office by 10. It was a law firm downtown, clean, quiet, the kind of place where the carpets were thick enough to absorb sound. The attorney, a tall man named Graham, sat across from her with a printed copy of her notebook. They had photographed every page the morning of the audit and spent 2 hours going through it with her, date by date, amount by amount. He asked precise questions and she gave precise answers, and at the end of it, he looked at her across the table and said, with the specific admiration of someone who doesn't give it easily, this is better documentation than most trained investigators produce. My father kept logs, she said. He taught me that if you write it down the same day, in the same handwriting, with the same pen, it's hard to argue with. He was right, Graham said. She was back on the street by noon. She had a message from an unknown number, different unknown number from the night before. She stood on the sidewalk and opened it. It was a photograph of her father's hospital. No message, just the photograph, just the building where Thomas Carter was scheduled to begin his treatment on Monday. Emily's vision went white for a moment. Not fear, rage. The specific clarifying rage of someone who has been pushed past their limit and has found on the other side of that limit something much colder and more purposeful than anger. She called Diana. They sent me a photograph of my father's hospital, she said. Just now, no message, just the building. Diana's exhale was quiet and controlled. Forward it to me immediately. Already done. Don't go to the hospital today. Don't change your father's schedule. I'll explain why in a moment, but don't go there yourself today. A pause. Pause. Miss Carter, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. Tell me. Mr. Moretti is aware of the photograph. He was notified 30 seconds before you called me. A pause that had weight in it. He's handling this personally. Emily stood on the sidewalk. What does that mean? She asked. Specifically. It means the people who sent that photograph are about to understand that they have miscalculated very seriously, Diana said. And it means your father's hospital has additional security as of 15 minutes ago and will until further notice. Emily breathed. Why is he doing this? She asked. Not rhetorically, a direct question. Diana was quiet for a moment. You should ask him that yourself, she said. He's going to call you. He called 11 minutes later. Emily was on a bench near the law firm sitting in the thin October sun, and when his name came up on her screen, he had apparently had Diana add his direct number to her contacts. Without telling her, she looked at it for 2 full rings before she answered. I should have been more honest with you yesterday, he said without introduction, without apology framing. Just the facts stated plainly. When Diana said probably nothing, I should have said I wasn't sure. Why didn't you? Emily asked. Because I didn't want to frighten you before there was something concrete to be frightened of, he said. That was my decision to make, and in retrospect, it was the wrong one. You deserve the full picture. Emily considered that. Most people would have apologized right now, she said. I'm explaining my reasoning, he said, which I think is more useful to you than an apology. It is, she said. What's the full picture? The full picture is that Rick Dawson was working with 2 men who run a specific type of operation in this city. They use small businesses to move cash. Diners, laundromats, small retail. They're not large scale. They're careful. They've been doing it for a long time. A pause. They're careful because they've never had their setup exposed from the inside before. What you did documenting it, preserving it, handing it to someone who could act on it, that doesn't happen in their experience. They don't know how to respond to it except with intimidation. Is the intimidation a real threat? She asked. Or performance? Both, he said. They're hoping you'll scare. If you scare, they'll stop. If you don't, they'll escalate for a while before they realize escalating against me is not something they have the capacity to sustain. Against you, Emily said, not against me. You are under my protection, he said. That makes anything directed at you directed at me. 3 weeks ago, Emily, Carter had been an invisible woman who fixed her own appliances and took the second seat near the bus driver after midnight and kept a notebook under her mattress because no one else was going to keep records of what was being taken from her. Now, a man who made the city careful when they said his name had just told her that she was under his protection. The world was genuinely strange. I didn't ask for that, she said. No, he said, you didn't. But you walked into the middle of something that was happening in my building, and you were honest with me when you didn't have to be, and you're dealing with consequences of that honesty. That's on me. I was honest because I was exhausted and desperate, she said. Let's not make it more noble than it was. A brief pause. You were exhausted and desperate and still chose honesty over silence, he said. That's exactly as noble as it sounds. She didn't have an answer to that. Your father's hospital is covered, he continued. The security team is in place. His Monday appointment will happen without any disruption. I need you to trust me on that. I barely know you, Emily said. I know, he said, but you've already trusted me once this week, with something that cost you more than this. He meant the notebook. He meant 4 months of evidence that was the only leverage she had handed to a stranger on a kitchen floor. I was right. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. And then after a brief pause, how are you? The question was so unexpected, so simple and direct after everything else, that Emily actually felt something shift in her throat. I'm angry, she said honestly. Good, he said. Angry is useful. Angry means you're paying attention. Were you ever frightened, she asked? When you were building everything you built, were you ever actually scared? The silence was long enough that she thought he might not answer. Yes, he said finally. For a long time. You learn to move through it instead of waiting for it to stop. A pause. It doesn't stop. You just get better at walking alongside it. She thought about that. I have to go back to work, she said. The diner opens back up tomorrow under the new management. I want to be there. I know, he said. Petra will go with you. To the diner, Emily said flatly. Until this is resolved, he said. She'll stay out of your way. She's good at being invisible. I know what that's like, Emily said. Another brief pause, and then quietly, yes, I imagine you do. She went back to work on Thursday morning. The new manager was a woman named Claire Sutton, early 40s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of running operations too complicated for drama. She introduced herself to the staff simply and without performance. She told them what she expected. She told them what she wouldn't tolerate. She gave them all the direct line to the corporate office and said that if anything felt wrong, they should use it. Maria caught Emily's eye across the room during this introduction and made the smallest possible expression, raised eyebrows, compressed lips that communicated this one is different. Emily nodded fractionally back. She worked her shift. Petra sat at the counter with a cup of coffee wearing clothes looking for all the world like a regular customer who happened to be very quietly aware of every person who walked through the door. Emily found after the first hour that she had almost forgotten Petra was there. Almost. The diner felt different. Not dramatically, the tables were the same, the menu was the same, the coffee still came out slightly too strong at the beginning of a new pot. But the weight was gone. The specific oppressive weight of working under someone who could do anything to you and knew it. Gone. And the absence of it made Emily realize how heavy it had been, because you don't always know how much something costs you until it's removed. At 11:40 in the morning, 3 men walked in. Emily was at the counter entering an order. She registered them the way she registered all new customers, quick sweep table count, approximate wait time. 2 of them were unremarkable. The third was a man in his 50s with a broad face and a specific way of looking around a room that was not the way a normal customer looked around a room. He was assessing it. He sat at a table near the window. One of the other 2 sat with him. The third went to the counter. Coffee, he said to Emily. His eyes moved over her and then stayed on her face with a deliberateness that made the hair on her arms stand up. Sure, she said. Her voice was even. She reached for the pot. You, Emily Carter, he said. She put the coffee down in front of him. Is there something else I can get you? I asked you a question, he said. I heard you, she said. I'm working. If you need something from the menu, I'm happy to help. From the corner of her eyes, she could see Petra had gone completely still on her stool, hands flat on the counter, coffee cup set down. You should have stayed quiet, the man at the counter said. His voice was low. Someone gave you good advice, and you didn't take it. Emily looked at him directly. She had spent years looking away at the floor at her order pad, at the middle distance, because looking directly at men like Rick Dawson always cost something. She looked at this man directly. I take orders at this counter, she said. Not advice from strangers. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Can I get you something from the menu? He stared at her. Then he pushed back from the stool and stood up, and Emily heard Petra's stool scrape back at the same moment. And the man glanced over at Petra, and something passed across his face, recognition, recalculation, and he said nothing more. He looked at his companions near the window. Some signal was exchanged that Emily couldn't fully read. They left, all 3 of them, without ordering anything else, without another word. The diner was quiet for a moment. Claire Sutton appeared from the back hallway. She had seen everything through the pass-through window. Her expression was calm, and her voice was calm, and she said, Emily, take 5 minutes. I've got the floor. Emily went to the back. She stood near the supply closet, the same spot where she had cried 3 nights ago, and she pressed her hands flat against the wall and breathed. She was shaking. She realized it with mild surprise, the way you sometimes realize your body has been doing something without your permission. Her hands were shaking against the wall. She pressed harder. She thought I did not run. I looked at him directly. I held the line. She thought about her father's hands on the hospital blanket. She thought about the notebook. She took 3 more breaths. The shaking stopped. She went back to the floor. Petra was at the counter, coffee cup back in hand, looking like someone who had been sitting there all morning without incident. Good job, Petra said quietly as Emily passed. Just those 2 words. Thank you, Emily said. Just those 2 words back. She worked the rest of the shift. At 2 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed. Diana. The 3 men who came into the diner this morning have been identified, Diana said. Mr. Moretti would like you to know that the situation is being addressed at its source. You may receive no further contact, but if you do, you call me immediately. I know the protocol, Emily said. You handled it well. I was terrified, Emily said. I know, Diana said. That's why it was impressive. Emily ended the call and stood for a moment at the counter between the coffee station and the register in the diner that had been full of fear a week ago and was full of something different now. Not peace, exactly not yet, but the beginning of a different atmosphere. The way a room smells different after you've opened the windows. Claire was at a table nearby, reviewing paperwork. Maria was on the floor working her section with the same quiet efficiency she always had, and she paused as she passed Emily to say just casually, "His coffee's running low at table 7. "I've got it," Emily said. She picked up the pot. She moved through the floor. She refilled the coffee at table 7 and thanked the customer and straightened her apron and thought about the man with the flat voice and the deliberate eyes and the way she had looked at him directly and held the line. And she thought about how strange it was that the most important thing she had done this week was not hand a notebook to a powerful man. It was stay on her feet in the kitchen when the crying was over and go back to the floor and then stay on her feet again the next day and then again the day after that. The staying was the thing. It was always the staying. At 4 in the afternoon as her shift ended, Vincent Moretti walked into the Blue Lantern. He didn't come to her table. He sat at the counter. He ordered coffee from Maria, who brought it to him with the specific, respectful caution of someone who knew exactly who she was serving. Emily was changing her apron near the back. When she came back to the floor to clock out, she saw him there, and she stopped. He was looking at her, not demanding anything, not signaling anything complicated, just looking at her the same way he had on the first night, with that direct attention that didn't slide past or through but simply landed. She walked to the counter and sat on the stool, 2 down from him. "I heard about this morning," he said, "and Diana's efficient," she said. "You didn't back down." "No," she said, "I didn't." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Are you all right?" "I'm tired," she said. "I'm scared in the background. My father starts treatment Monday. My back hurts." She paused. "But yes, I'm all right." He nodded. "The men this morning," he said, "you'll hear from them again." "I figured." "When you do," he said, "and it will be a call, not a visit, they tend to escalate and then retreat before they actually risk a direct confrontation. When you do, I want you to answer it. Don't hang up. Let them say whatever they say, and then call Diana." "Why should I let them say it?" "Because they'll tell you more than they intend to," he said. "Frightened people always do." Emily looked at him. "You know them." "I know the type," he said. "I spent a long time in the same world, Emily. I know exactly how they think." It was the first time he had used her name in conversation, not in acknowledgement, not in introduction, but in the middle of a sentence as a natural thing. She noticed it the way you notice a small shift in temperature. "Is that how you got out?" she asked. Knowing how they think, he was quiet for a moment. "Partly," he said, "and partly someone who didn't owe me anything told me the truth when I needed to hear it and couldn't ask for it." A pause. "It happens sometimes. Someone comes along and changes the direction of a thing just by being honest." Emily held his gaze. "I was just a tired woman crying in a kitchen," she said. "I know," he said. "That's exactly what I mean." He finished his coffee. He put the cup down. He stood. "Monday," he said. "Someone will be at the hospital when your father arrives, not inside, just near. You won't see them unless you need them." "Okay," she said. "Get some rest tonight," he said. He left. Emily sat at the counter for a moment after he was gone. Maria drifted by and refilled Emily's water glass without being asked, and Emily looked up at her, and Maria gave her the same eyebrow and lips expression as before, but different this time, not, "What do you think of the new management?" Something else. Something that was mostly warmth and a little bit of awe and a little bit of the specific solidarity of women who have watched each other survive things they shouldn't have had to survive. Emily raised her water glass slightly. Maria raised her coffee pot. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Emily walked home through the late afternoon. Petra was 3 steps behind her, just near enough to be present, just far enough to be invisible. The sun was low and the air had the particular cold clarity of a Boston October, and Emily walked with her hands in her pockets and her eyes forward, and she thought about her father's hands and the notebook and the flat voice on the phone and the 3 men who had walked out of the diner and Vincent Moretti's voice saying, "I know what that sounds like." She thought about how much had changed in 72 hours. She thought about how much was still unfinished. She was not safe yet. She was not past this yet. The men who had sent a photograph of her father's hospital were still out there, still recalculating, still deciding what the price of silence was worth versus what they had to lose by pursuing it. But she was on her feet. She was still on her feet. And something had changed in her that she didn't have the exact words for yet. Something in the place where her apologies used to live. The reflex to make herself smaller, to accept what was given, and say thank you and disappear. That place felt different now. Not empty. Different. Like a room that has been cleared of furniture that was never the right furniture to begin with. She climbed 4 flights of stairs. She unlocked her door. She went inside. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her phone, and for the first time in 4 months, she did not open the calculator app. She did not run the numbers. She did not count the distance between what she had and what she needed. She just sat and let the quiet be quiet. Outside her window, the city made its usual sounds, the traffic, the voices, the particular hum of a place that never entirely stopped. And Emily Carter sat inside all of it and breathed and thought about Monday and thought about her father's voice on the phone saying, "I love you, baby girl," and thought about the work still ahead of her and did not run from any of it. She was ready. Monday came the way important days always do, quietly without announcement, as if the calendar had not registered what was at stake. Emily was up at 5:45. She hadn't set an alarm. Her body simply refused to sleep past the point where the anxiety of waiting became more exhausting than getting up and doing something about it. She made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window and watched the city come into its early morning version of itself, the delivery trucks, the joggers, the specific quality of light that Boston had in October before the sun fully committed to being present. Her father's first treatment session was at 9. She had told him she would meet him there at 8:30. She had not told him about the men at the diner or the photograph of the hospital or the security team that would be nearby but invisible. She had made a calculation, the same kind of calculation she had always made, about what her father needed to know versus what would only add weight to a body already carrying too much. Thomas Carter was scheduled to sit in a chair and receive treatment that would take 4 hours and require every resource his body had. He did not need to spend those 4 hours worrying about his daughter. She would tell him later, when it was over, when she could frame it as a thing that had happened and been handled rather than a thing that was happening and unresolved. She got dressed. She put on the dark green sweater her father had given her 2 birthdays ago because he said it matched her eyes, which were brown, and she had never pointed out that discrepancy because the gesture was the point. She made toast. She ate it standing up. Her phone buzzed at 7:15. "Petra, I'll be outside your building at 7:45, Petra said. "We'll go to the hospital together." "You don't need to come inside," Emily said. "I won't," Petra said, "unless you want me to." Emily thought about it. "No, this is between me and my dad." "Understood. I'll be at the entrance." She arrived at St. Vincent's at 8:22. Her father was already there. Of course, he was Thomas. Carter had never been late for anything in his life, operating on the principle that being on time was a form of respect and being early was a form of love. He was in the waiting area outside the treatment center wearing his good jacket, the navy one he kept for occasions, and he stood up when he saw her. She walked into his arms. He held on longer than usual. She let him. "How are you feeling?" she asked when they separated. "Like a man who's about to let someone put chemicals in his blood," he said. "But a man who gets to see his daughter first, so net positive." "Net positive," she repeated. "That's your metric. It's a good metric." She walked with him through the check-in process, sat beside him, while the nurse went through the pre-treatment information, held his hand when they put in the IV. He didn't ask her to, she just did it, and he let her, and neither of them commented on it. When the treatment started and the nurse left them with the quiet hum of the equipment and the soft sounds of the ward around them, Thomas looked at the ceiling for a moment and then looked at her. "Tell me the rest of it," he said. "Dad." "Emily," his voice was gentle and immovable, "I'm lying in a chair for 4 hours. I have nowhere to go, and I know you're not telling me everything because you never do, and I have spent 27 years watching you protect me from things you didn't think I could handle." He turned his head to look at her directly. "I can handle things, tell me," she told him. All of it this time. The phone call with the flat voice, the photograph, the 3 men at the diner, what Petra was and why she was outside right now. What Vincent had said about the people escalating before they retreated. Thomas listened without interrupting, which was not his usual style. He was a man who responded in real time, who asked questions mid-sentence, who processed out loud. The fact that he stayed silent through all of it told her more about how seriously he was taking it than any words would have. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This man," he said finally. "Moretti. Yes. You trust him." It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "Yes," she said. "I don't entirely understand why, but yes." "I do," Thomas said. "I think I do. He knows what it costs someone to do what you did, and he's not the kind of man who can ignore a debt." "It wasn't a debt," Emily said. "I handed him a notebook. That's not—" "You handed him the truth when you didn't have to," Thomas said, "and you didn't ask for anything in return." "Emily, that's the rarest currency there is. A man who has spent his whole life in a world where everyone wants something from him, when someone comes along who doesn't, who just gives him honesty with no expectation attached, that lands differently." He paused. "Trust your instincts. You have good ones. Always have." She looked at her father's face, the lines in it that hadn't been there 5 years ago. The gray at his temples, the specific exhaustion of someone who had been sick and fighting and pretending not to be both. She thought about the 30 years he had shown up for work and for her and for every ordinary obligation of an unadorned life. And she thought about how unfair it was, and then she put that thought away, because fairness was not a useful concept and never had been. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I know," he said. "I love you too. Now tell me something else. Tell me about the diner. Tell me what it feels like now that the other manager is gone." She talked for 2 hours about Claire Sutton and her efficient calm, about Maria's eyebrow expression, about Jorge deciding to be a certain kind of person, about the coffee that still came out too strong at the start of a new pot. She talked and her father listened and asked questions and laughed in the right places, and the 4 hours passed the way time sometimes does, when you are fully present inside it, not quickly, not slowly, but completely. When the treatment ended and the nurse came to remove the IV, and her father sat up carefully and declared himself net positive again, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, something more structural than happiness, like a load-bearing wall that had been reinforced. They were outside by 1:15. Petra was exactly where Emily had left her, standing near the entrance with coffee she'd apparently gotten from the hospital cafeteria, looking like someone who had not spent 4 hours standing watch. Thomas looked at her, then at Emily, then back at Petra. "Thank you," he said to Petra directly, simply. Petra nodded. "Mr. Carter." Thomas looked at Emily with an expression that said, "I like her. She's competent." Then he let Emily put him in a cab, made her promise to call that evening, and was gone. Emily stood on the sidewalk. "Good morning?" Petra asked. "Good morning," Emily said. Her phone rang at 1:47. Unknown number, different from the others. She remembered what Vincent had said. "Answer it. Let them say what they say." "Then call Diana," she answered. "Ms. Carter." The voice was older this time, measured. The voice of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped being dramatic about it. "I think it's time we spoke directly." "You have 30 seconds, she said. "Then I'm hanging up and calling someone who will find this number in about 4 minutes. A pause. "I want you to understand something. What happened at the Blue Lantern, that was Rick Dawson's mistake, not ours. We don't have any quarrel with a waitress. We have a problem with exposure, and right now you're the most visible part of that exposure." "I'm a waitress who kept records," Emily said. "That's all I am." "You're a waitress who kept records and gave them to Vincent Moretti," the voice said. "Which makes you connected to him, which makes you complicated." "I'm not connected to anyone," Emily said. "I gave a business owner documentation of theft happening in his business. That's a straightforward thing." "It would be," the voice said, "if Vincent Moretti were a straightforward businessman." Emily said nothing. "We're not your enemy," the voice continued. "We'd like this to be over." Quietly, without anyone else being affected. A pause that had calculation in it. "There are ways this could benefit you, financially, meaningfully." "Are you offering me money to stop cooperating with an investigation?" Emily said clearly. She said it loudly enough that Petra, standing 3 feet away, turned to look at her. "I'm suggesting there are options." "I have 30 seconds left," Emily said. "Actually, you have 3. I'd use them to say goodbye." She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, phone in hand, and her hands were not shaking this time. They were completely still. She noticed that with the same mild surprise as before, but in the opposite direction. She called Diana. She relayed the call word for word with the specific precision of someone who had been documenting things long enough to repeat conversations accurately. Diana asked 3 follow-up questions. Emily answered all of them. They offered you money, Diana said. Yes. That's on record now. You've essentially given us a bribery attempt. I know, Emily said. That's why I said it loudly. A brief silence. You're very good at this, Diana said. I'm good at keeping records, Emily said. I've been doing it my whole life. Nobody ever told me I'd need it for something like this. Forward me the number immediately. Done. She put her phone away. She looked at Petra. Coffee, Petra said. You need coffee. I really do, Emily said. They went to a place 2 blocks from the hospital that was small and not crowded and served coffee in ceramic mugs. And Emily sat across from Petra, she was discovering a woman of precise few words and extremely accurate instincts, and drank her coffee and let the morning settle around her. How long have you worked for him? Emily asked. 7 years, Petra said. Emily tried to find the exact right question. Is he what people say he is? Petra considered this with visible seriousness, which Emily appreciated. He's what he built himself into, Petra said finally. Whether that matches what people say depends on what people say. People say he's dangerous. He is, Petra said simply. He's also the only person I've ever worked for who remembered my daughter's birthday 3 years in a row without being reminded. A pause. People are not one thing, powerful people especially. The ones who pretend to be one thing are the ones you have to watch out for. Emily turned her coffee cup in her hands. He said something to me about someone who told him the truth when he needed it and couldn't ask for it. He said it changed the direction of a thing. Petra looked at her steadily. He said that to you? Yes. Petra was quiet for a moment. He doesn't talk about that, she said. Not to people he's just met. What happened? Emily asked. To him. What's the thing that changed direction? Petra shook her head slightly. Not a refusal. More like the shake of someone who knows something is not theirs to give. That's his to tell you, she said, if he decides to. Emily nodded. She let it go. She went to work at 3 that afternoon. The Blue Lantern on a Monday afternoon was quieter than the late-night shifts she usually worked. Different crowd, different rhythm. The specific pace of a place in its daytime identity. Claire was there, moving through operational tasks with the same efficient calm Emily was beginning to recognize as simply her baseline. Maria was not on shift today, but she had left Emily a note in the break room folded and tucked under Emily's name on the schedule board, which was a thing Maria did when she had something to say that she didn't want to say out loud. Emily opened it. It said, "My sister told me what you did." The whole thing, the notebook. Don't argue about whether it was brave. It was brave. Also, the coffee at Station 2 is still doing the weird thing where it runs too hot. I told Claire, just so you know, someone is handling it. Emily folded the note and put it in her apron pocket. She worked the afternoon shift cleanly without incident. No unfamiliar faces. No men with assessing eyes. The diner was simply a diner doing its business, and Emily moved through it the way she always had, efficiently, attentively, with the specific pleasure she had always taken in doing the job well, which had nothing to do with anyone watching and everything to do with her own standard. At 5:47, Vincent Moretti came in. He sat at the counter, this time not the corner booth. Emily registered this without analyzing it and went over with the coffee pot. "How's your father?" he asked. "First session done," she said. He declared himself net positive. Something in Vincent's expression shifted slightly, a small warming. Net positive, I like that. He invented it, she said. It's his whole philosophy. She poured his coffee. She started to move to the next customer. Emily, his voice was quiet. She stopped. "They called you today." "Yes," she said. "I called Diana after." "I know, she told me." He paused. "They offered you money." "Yes." "And you turned it down." "Obviously," she said. He looked at her steadily. "It wasn't obvious. You needed money. A week ago, you needed money more than almost anything. And they offered you some." "They offered me money to disappear," she said. "That's different from money. That's a price tag on who I am. I don't have a lot of things, but I have who I am." She met his eyes. "I'm not selling that." The counter was quiet between them for a moment. "The man who called you," Vincent said. "His name is Gerald Fossey. He's been running this specific type of operation in Boston for 11 years. He's been careful enough and small enough to avoid serious attention. He paused. Until now. What happens to him now? Emily asked. He is currently discovering that having the attention of the people my legal team has contacted is significantly less comfortable than the lack of attention he previously enjoyed, Vincent said, and that the bribery attempt on a protected witness has added a dimension to his situation that he did not intend. Protected witness, Emily said. Am I officially? Yes, Vincent said. As of this morning, Graham finalized the paperwork. You didn't need to do anything. It was triggered by the documented bribery attempt. A pause. You made that happen when you repeated the offer out loud on the call. Petra confirmed you said it clearly. Emily thought about that, about standing on the sidewalk outside the hospital and looking at Petra and choosing to say the word financially loudly enough to be heard. I wasn't sure that was the right move, she said honestly. It was exactly the right move, he said. She looked at him. You knew they'd call today. I thought they might. You told me to answer and let them say what they'd say. Yes. You knew what they'd offer. He met her gaze without flinching. I had a strong expectation, he said carefully. Emily felt the specific sensation of a thing becoming clear. Not betrayal, not anger. Something more like the adjustment of understanding the recalibration that happens when you realize a game has had more dimensions than you could see from where you were standing. You were ready for it, she said. The bribery attempt. That's why you told me to answer and keep them talking. I needed them to commit to a specific action, he said. In a documented way, that closes a door for them that would otherwise have stayed open. And you used me to do it? She said. The words landed between them. He didn't deny it. He didn't soften it. He said, yes, I did. And I should have told you that was the plan before the call happened instead of after. That was wrong. The honesty of it, direct and qualified, was so unlike what she expected that it stopped the rest of what she had been about to say. She looked at him. Why didn't you just tell me? She asked. Because I wasn't sure you'd do it if you knew it was a setup, he said. And if you hesitated, they'd know. And then they'd find another approach. So you trusted my reaction more than my decision. Yes, that's manipulative. Yes, he said. It is. I'm good at it. I've been good at it for 20 years. It's one of the reasons I'm still here. He paused and something in his face changed, not softening exactly, but becoming more honest, like he was removing a layer of professional distance he usually kept in place. It's also one of the reasons I'm sitting in this diner at 6 in the evening, explaining myself to a waitress, which is not something I do. Emily sat down on the stool across from him. It was not a decision she made consciously. Her body decided, and she followed. Are you explaining yourself, she said, or are you still running a calculation? Both, he said, but the explanation is real. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm angry, she said. I know. I'm also not going to pretend the outcome was wrong, she said, because it wasn't. Fosse is now facing a documented bribery attempt, and I have protected witness status, and those are both good things, she paused. But I want to be inside the decisions that affect me, not the instrument of them. That's fair, he said. Is it something you can actually do, she asked. Tell me things in advance instead of positioning me to react to them. I was quiet for a moment that felt genuine rather than strategic. I'll try, he said. That's an honest answer. I've spent a long time operating in a way where information is managed because information is leverage, and letting go of that, even with someone I trust, is a habit with 20 years of muscle memory. Emily registered the word trust, but didn't comment on it. Try, she said. That's enough for now. He nodded. She picked up the coffee pot again. Can I ask you something, she said. Go ahead. You said someone told you the truth once when you needed it and couldn't ask for it, that it changed the direction of a thing. She kept her voice even and her eyes on the coffee pot. What was the thing? The counter was very quiet. She looked up. He was looking at the surface of his coffee cup, and his expression had something in it she hadn't seen before. Not vulnerability exactly, but the carefully controlled proximity to it of someone who has learned to keep it inside and is now deciding consciously to allow a small portion of it out. My son, he said. Emily went still. He's 14 now. He lives with his mother in Providence. Vincent's voice was even and careful, the way a voice gets when someone has practiced saying something difficult enough times that the delivery is controlled, but the content is still live underneath. When he was 9, I was elsewhere, in ways that mattered, present in the physical sense and absent in every way that counted. He paused. There was a woman who worked in the restaurant I owned then, not a waitress, the accountant. She sat down in my office one afternoon and told me without being asked, and at considerable personal risk to her employment, that my son had called the restaurant phone 3 times that week looking for me, and that the third time he had cried and then asked her not to tell me because he didn't want to make me feel bad. Emily felt the sentence land in her chest. She could have said nothing, Vincent continued. She had every reason to say nothing, but she didn't. She told me the truth and she looked me in the face while she did it, and she didn't apologize for telling me. He paused. I drove to Providence that night. I've been driving to Providence every weekend for the past 5 years. The silence held. Is that why you went back to the kitchen? Emily asked quietly, when you heard me. He looked at her. Someone being honest when it cost them, that's a sound I recognize, he said, whether it's crying or accounting records or a phone call from a 9-year-old. She held his gaze. Something passed between them that neither of them named. Not because they couldn't, but because some things are more real before they have words, and both of them understood that each in their own way. Okay, she said. She picked up the coffee pot. Decaf. He almost smiled, that almost smile she was beginning to recognize as his real one. No, he said, I'll take the real thing. She poured. 2 days later, Graham called Emily at 9 in the morning. Gerald Fossey retained new counsel overnight, Graham said. They reached out to us this morning. He's looking to negotiate. Negotiate what? Emily asked. His cooperation, Graham said. In exchange for a reduction in the charges he's currently facing, he's offering full disclosure of the cash operation, names, locations, methods, the full structure, going back 4 years. And Rick Dawson, Emily asked. Rick Dawson will not be negotiating anything, Graham said. There was a specific quality to his voice that told her the story there was already finished. His attorney filed the wrongful termination suit yesterday as planned. It was dismissed this morning. The judge took approximately 11 minutes to read your documentation and the audit results before ruling. Emily stood in her kitchen with her coffee in her hand and felt the particular satisfaction of watching something that had been wrong for a long time become specifically, documentably, legally wrong in a way that could not be argued with. 11 minutes, she said. 11 minutes, Graham confirmed. Your records were, as I told you, extremely thorough. My father taught me to write things down the same day, she said, in the same pen. Please thank him from me, Graham said. She called her father immediately after. Thomas laughed so hard he had to put the phone down for a moment. 11 minutes, he said when he could speak again. Baby girl, 11 minutes. Your methodology, she said, your logs. Our methodology, he said, our logs. A pause and his voice dropped into something more serious. How are you really? She tried to find the honest word. Processing, she said. It's a lot of things happening very fast and I keep waiting for the next bad thing and then the next bad thing doesn't come, and that's almost harder. You get used to bracing. Yeah, he said. You do. A pause. Is it strange with him? She knew exactly who he meant. Yes, she said. He told me about his son. Thomas was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing, he said. A man like that telling someone about his son. I know. Are you being careful? Of what, she asked. Of him or of myself? Both, Thomas said, but mostly yourself, because you have spent a very long time making yourself smaller than you are, and I think this situation is showing you how large you actually are, and that can be, he paused, searching for the word, disorienting. Emily looked at her kitchen wall. Yeah, she said, yeah, it is. She went to work at noon. Claire had reorganized the tip distribution system, a proper digital record now transparent and auditable, with each employee's account accessed directly, no manager touching cash. Emily looked at the new setup and thought about the notebook under her mattress and felt something that was not quite triumph but was adjacent to it. Something earned, something that had cost the right price. At 2 in the afternoon, Jorge came in. He wasn't on shift, he was just there in his street clothes, and he came to the counter where Emily was working and said, I wanted to tell you something. Okay, she said. My mom and I talked about what happened, about Rick and everything. He paused. He was choosing his words with the care of someone who doesn't say serious things lightly. I want to study business administration. I want to understand how to run places so people can't do what Rick did. So there's no gaps where someone like him can hide. He looked at her steadily. You showed me that the documentation is the thing. The records. That's how you fight it. Emily looked at this 17-year-old with his serious eyes and his decided expression, and she thought about her father with his machinist's logs and his careful handwriting and the principle that facts written down had weight. Study everything, what she said. Not just the business side, study the people side. Because what Rick did wasn't just financial. It was about who he decided was safe to target. That's the thing you have to understand how to see. Jorge nodded slowly. How did you see it? I was one of the targets, she said simply. Sometimes you learn the most specific things about a trap by being inside it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm sorry I didn't do anything sooner. You're 17, she said, and you did do something. You moved between him and Maria that one time. You got between him and me. You showed up when Graham's team needed corroboration. She looked at him. You did plenty. He left looking slightly less burdened. Maria came by and refilled Emily's water glass without being asked, same as always, and said quietly, Good kid. Good kid, Emily agreed. At 4 in the afternoon, Petra stopped Emily outside the diner as her shift ended. Update, Petra said. Fossey finalized his cooperation agreement an hour ago. Full disclosure. The operation is being dismantled. His people have been notified that retaliating against anyone connected to this case is not something they will find sustainable. Emily exhaled. It's over, she said. The active threat is over, Petra said carefully. There are processes that will continue for months, legal things. But the part where you need someone outside your building at night, that's done. Emily stood on the sidewalk outside of the Blue Lantern and let that settle through her, the specific, unfamiliar lightness of a threat that had been lifted the way you don't fully know how much space fear has been taking up until it vacates the premises. Thank you, she said to Petra, for all of it, the hospital, the diner, everything. You made my job easy, Petra said. You didn't panic. That's rarer than people think. I panicked internally, Emily said. Everybody does, Petra said. The ones who handle things are the ones who panic on the inside and hold steady on the outside. You're one of those. She said it the way Petra said everything, with economy and precision and no excess sentiment. But Emily heard it fully. She walked home alone for the first time in days. 4 blocks, October cold, the particular late afternoon light that turned everything briefly golden before the dark came in. She thought about the 11 minutes it had taken a judge to dismiss Rick Dawson's suit. She thought about Gerald Foss in a room with lawyers deciding that cooperation was cheaper than the alternative. She thought about her father declaring himself net positive and Jorge's serious eyes and Maria's coffee pot raised like a toast. She thought about the accountant in a restaurant 11 years ago who had sat down in a man's office and told him the truth about his son and changed the direction of something enormous with an act of honesty that had cost her something real. She thought about Vincent Moretti saying, I know what that sounds like. She climbed her 4 flights of stairs. She unlocked her door. She reached under the mattress and pulled out the coffee tin. She opened it. $340. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took out $100, put the tin back, and went to her small desk and sat down and opened her laptop and pulled up the Boston Community College website because she had been looking at their business administration evening program for 2 years. And every time she'd gotten close to applying the math of the application fee and the textbooks and the reduced hours had pushed her back. The application fee was $75. She paid it. She sat back. She looked at the confirmation on the screen. She thought, that's the most terrifying thing I've done all week. And that week had included standing down a man with flat eyes in her own diner and letting a stranger use her as bait for a bribery trap and sitting beside her father while chemicals ran into his blood. And everything she had been holding for months came down to whether a judge would take 11 minutes or 11 hours. And still, the application, the $75, the commitment, the most terrifying, because everything else she had done this week had been in reaction to things that were happening to her. This was a choice, pure and uncomposed, and entirely hers. Her phone buzzed. Vincent, she answered. Diana tells me the situation is resolved, he said. How are you? I just applied to community college, she said. A pause. Business administration. How did you know? You're the woman who kept a 4-month ledger of financial theft in a spiral notebook under her mattress, he said. It was either business or law. I thought about law, she said. Maybe both eventually. Both, he said without hesitation. Definitely both. She looked at the confirmation on her screen. I wanted to say something, she said. And I want to say it clearly so you know it's not just I want you to know that what you did the day after the kitchen when you called it a debt and not charity, and when you explained your reasoning, even when it was wrong, I don't have a lot of experience with people who do that, who are accountable in real time without being asked. He was quiet. I'm not good at receiving that, he said finally, but I heard it. Okay, she said. Okay. A pause, easy unforced. My son comes this weekend, he said. He's been asking about the diner. I told him my accountant said the coffee was the best in the city and he wants to try it. Emily smiled. Your accountant has high standards. The coffee at Station 2 runs too hot. I'll let him know, Vincent said. He's very particular about temperature. How old did you say he was? 14. Bring him in, she said. I'll make sure he gets a good cup. Saturday, he said, around noon. I'll be on the floor, she said. She hung up. She looked at her laptop screen for a moment longer. Then she closed it, got up and went to make dinner, and the apartment was quiet around her, in the particular way that quiet is when it has been earned. Not the silence of someone waiting for the next bad thing, but the silence of someone who is for the first time in a long time simply present in their own life, with their own choices in their own small space on their own terms. That was enough. For tonight, that was more than enough. Saturday came in cold and clear. The kind of October morning that Boston occasionally offered as an apology for the gray weeks surrounding it. Emily was on the floor by 11, moving through the pre-lunch setup with the rhythm she had been building for years, refilling sugars, checking the coffee stations, making sure Table 7 had the extra napkin holder it always needed because the lunch crowd at Table 7 was inexplicably hard on napkins. Claire was in the back doing inventory. Maria came in at 11:30, unwrapped her scarf and said without preamble, "He's bringing the kid today." "How do you know?" Emily asked. "Petra mentioned it when she stopped in yesterday for coffee," Maria said. "She comes in for coffee a lot now." "She does," Emily agreed. "I think she likes the place," Maria said. She paused at the coffee station, adjusted the temperature on Station 2, which had, after 3 weeks of Claire's diligent attention, finally stopped running too hot, and added, "I think a lot of people like the place now, more than before." Emily looked around the diner. The same tables, the same counter, the same bell above the door that rang every time someone came in. But Maria was right. Something had changed in the quality of the place, not the surfaces, not the furniture, but the atmosphere, the way the air felt when you walked in. Like the difference between a room where people have been unhappy for a long time and a room where they haven't. "Is that strange?" Emily asked. "That it feels different and nothing actually changed." "Everything changed," Maria said simply. "You just can't point at the thing that changed." At 12:04, the bell above the door rang, and Emily looked up from the counter where she was entering an order, and Vincent Moretti walked in. I was wearing a jacket she hadn't seen before, slightly more casual than as usual, and beside him was a boy who was unmistakably his son. The same dark hair, the same particular way of holding himself, the same quality of paying attention to a room when he entered it. But where Vincent's attention was strategic and controlled the boys was openly curious, taking in everything with the unguarded interest of someone who had not yet learned to make his interest look like something else. I was tall or 14. He had his father's eyes. He looked at the diner the way people look at places they have been curious about for a while. Vincent caught Emily's eye across the room. A nod. She came over. "Emily Carter," Vincent said. "This is my son Leo." Leo looked at her directly. "You're the one who kept the notebook," he said. Emily blinked. Then she looked at Vincent. "I told him the relevant parts," Vincent said. "Not apologetically, just as a fact." "You told a 14-year-old about the investigation," Emily said. "He's not a typical 14-year-old, Vincent said. "I'm right here," Leo said. "And yeah, he told me. He tells me things now. It's a relatively new development." He said it with the specific dry humor of a teenager who has learned to make wit out of complicated things. "He said you gave him a notebook full of evidence and then told him you weren't interested in charity." "That's an accurate summary," Emily said. "I thought that was cool," Leo said. "Most people want things from him. You wanted things from yourself." Emily looked at this 14-year-old with his precise observation in his father's eyes and thought, yes, you are absolutely not a typical 14-year-old. Corner booth, she asked Vincent. Corner booth, he said. She seated them and brought coffee, real for Vincent, hot chocolate for Leo, who did not argue with this categorization and in fact looked quietly pleased by it. She went back to the floor and managed her other tables and let them have their meal, because that was what they were there for, and she was not going to hover. But she noticed things. She noticed the way Vincent talked to his son differently than she had heard him talk to anyone else. Not with the careful management of information that he brought to everything, but with a directness that had warmth in it, a willingness to be wrong in front of someone, a kind of looseness she hadn't seen in him before. She noticed the way Leo talked back confidently without hesitation, the way a kid talks when they've been shown that their words have value. She noticed that they argued about something around 12:30. She couldn't hear the words, just the specific rhythm of a disagreement between two people who respect each other enough to actually disagree, and that Leo made a point with his hands, and Vincent was quiet for a moment, and then said something short, and Leo looked satisfied in the way of someone who has won an argument without needing to make a production of winning it. She noticed that Vincent watched his son with an expression she had no words for and didn't try to find any. At 1:15, when the lunch rush was thinning, Leo appeared at the counter. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure," Emily said. "When you were documenting everything, the tips, the dates, were you scared? Like, what if he found out?" "Yes," Emily said, "every day." "But you kept doing it." "The alternative was stopping," she said, "and stopping felt worse." Leo considered this. "My dad said that you didn't ask for anything back, that you just handed him the truth." "I was out of options," Emily said. "When you're out of options, the truth is sometimes the only thing you have left that's worth anything." "He says that changed something for him," Leo said. "The way he thinks about, he doesn't say it exactly like that, but I can tell." He paused. "He tells me things now, things he didn't before. I think you had something to do with that." Emily looked at this kid with his serious eyes and his careful honesty and thought about the accountant in an office 11 years ago and about her father's machinist's logs and about the specific way that truth moved through people. Not always dramatically, not always all at once, but steadily the way water moves through stone. "Your dad had that in him already," she said. "I just happened to show up at the right moment." "Maybe," Leo said, "but the right moment matters." I went back to the booth. Emily stood at the counter for a moment and breathed. Maria came up behind her and said very quietly, close to her ear, "That kid is something else." "He really is," Emily said. The afternoon settled into its quieter Saturday rhythm. Vincent and Leo stayed until 2, and when they left, Leo stopped at the door and turned back and said to the general space of the diner, "The coffee here is excellent, the hot chocolate also." He said it with the earnest formality of someone making an official declaration, and it made Maria laugh from somewhere in the back, and even Claire, passing through with a clipboard, smiled. Vincent looked at Emily as he passed. "Thank you," he said, "not for the coffee, not for the booth, something larger and more specific than that." "Anytime," she said. The door closed, the bell rang, Emily went back to work. 3 weeks later, she sat in her first evening class at Boston Community College. The room smelled like dry erase markers and institutional carpet, and the professor was a small woman in her 60s who had apparently spent 30 years in corporate accounting before deciding she would rather teach than continue to be in the room where decisions were made without enough people who understood what they were deciding. Her name was Professor Helen Marsh, and within the first 20 minutes of the first class, Emily had decided she was going to learn everything Helen Marsh would teach her. There were 12 other students in the evening section. 3 were younger than Emily. 4 were around her age. The rest were older people who were doing this alongside jobs and families in the particular complicated logistics of adult life. Emily recognized something in their faces that she recognized in her own, the specific combination of determination and fatigue, and the refusal to let the fatigue win. After class, a woman named Sandra, 42, 2 kids worked in a dental office during the day, stopped Emily in the hallway and said, "You look like you've done this before." "Taken a class," Emily said. "Sat in a room where someone was finally explaining the rules of a game you've been playing 4 years without knowing the rules," Sandra said. Emily looked at her. "Yeah," she said, "that's exactly what it feels like." They walked out together and talked for 40 minutes on the sidewalk before they realized they'd missed the same bus and had to wait for the next one. And by the time they got on, they had exchanged numbers and established a standing plan to study on Tuesday evenings, and Sandra had told Emily about the dental office she was planning to eventually buy, and Emily had told Sandra about the diner, and Sandra had said, "You kept a 4-month paper trail on your manager, and it took down a cash laundering operation." And Emily had said, "That is a more dramatic framing than I would have chosen, but yes." And Sandra had said, "Emily, you are the most interesting person I have met in 3 years." Emily went home smiling in a way that she hadn't expected. She texted her father first class, "Good professor, made a friend, net positive." He responded within 30 seconds with 3 exclamation points, which was 3 more than he had ever used in a text message in his life, and she laughed out loud alone in her apartment. Thomas Carter's second treatment session went as well as the first. His third went better. By the fourth, the doctor was using the word responding in a way that meant something real, not responsive to treatment in the careful hedged language of medical caution, but responding present tense actively. Emily sat in the chair beside his bed and heard the doctor say the word and watched her father's face and did not cry, because she had made a private agreement with herself that she would save the crying for when she was alone, and she kept agreements. She cried on the bus home, just the last 4 stops. Then she got off and walked to her building and climbed 4 flights and went inside and sat down and cried fully and completely for about 7 minutes. And then she washed her face and made tea and called Carla. "He's responding," she said. Carla made a sound on the other end of the phone that was not a word, but communicated everything a word could have and more. Then she said, "I need you to know that I have been holding my breath for months." "So have I," Emily said. "I think we can both breathe now." "Both breathing," Carla confirmed. In November, Diana Cho called with a final update on the legal proceedings. Gerald Foss's cooperation agreement had been fully executed. The cash operation had been dismantled. 3 of the individuals connected to it had accepted plea arrangements. Rick Dawson, in a separate matter that had emerged from the audit, was facing charges related to the illegal financial activities he had facilitated, not just the tip theft, which had its own civil resolution, but the deeper involvement with Foss's operation that the audit had uncovered. His attorney had stopped returning calls. "The civil settlement for the tip theft is finalized," Diana said. "Your portion plus the documentation compensation will be in your account by Friday." Emily sat with that for a moment. "How much?" Diana told her. Emily was quiet for a full 5 seconds. "That's," she started, "14 months of documented theft at the rates you recorded, plus statutory interest, plus damages, plus compensation for the documentation itself, which Graham argued successfully as a form of investigative labor." Diana paused. "Your records were worth more than you knew, Ms. Carter." "My father's records," Emily said automatically. "His methodology." "Your execution," Diana said. "Don't diminish it." Emily sat very still with the phone in her hand. "I don't know what to say," she said. "You don't have to say anything," Diana said. "It's yours. You earned it." The money arrived on Friday morning exactly as Diana had said. Emily checked her account 3 times to make sure it was real. Then she called her father. She said, "I need to tell you something." "Should I sit down?" he said. "You're already in bed," she said. "Should I sit up?" "Maybe," she said. She told him the number. Thomas Carter sat up very straight in his hospital bed and did not say anything for a long moment. "The notebook," he said finally. "The notebook," she said. "Emily." His voice had something in it she rarely heard, the specific overwhelm of a man who had spent his whole life being strong, encountering something too large for strength to be the right response. "Baby girl." "Don't," she said, because she knew if he cried, she would cry, and she had made her agreement with herself about crying in private. "I'm not crying," he said. He was absolutely crying. "Dad, I'm not." He took a breath, then another. I taught you to keep logs, and you kept logs. And the logs," he stopped, took another breath. "I am so proud of you. I have always been so proud of you. But right now, this is a specific kind of proud that I don't have a word for." "Net positive," she offered. He laughed. There it was, the real laugh, too loud, filling her phone and her apartment in the long October distance between them. "Net extremely positive," he said. She moved the coffee tin out from under the mattress. She didn't need it under the mattress anymore. She put it on her kitchen shelf between the cookbooks she rarely used and the small plant that had survived 3 years of her inconsistent attention. She left it there not as a savings device, but as a marker, the thing that had held the line when the line was all she had. She enrolled in a second class for the spring semester. Business law, Professor Marsh had recommended it specifically to Emily after class one evening in November, when Emily had stayed late to ask a question and they had ended up talking for 40 minutes about the structural vulnerabilities in small business management that allowed people like Rick Dawson to operate. You have a specific kind of mind, Professor Marsh had said. You see the gap between how something is supposed to work and how it actually works. That's rare and it's valuable, and you should be pointing it at something. I'm pointing it at a diner, Emily had said. Start there, Professor Marsh had said. Don't stay there. She thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. In the second week of December, Vincent came into the diner on a Tuesday evening and sat at the counter, his counter seat. She had begun to think of it, though she never said that, and drank his coffee and waited until the floor was quiet before he said, I have something to ask you. Emily was wiping down the counter. She stopped. I'm opening a second location, he said. Different neighborhood, South End. The space is ready. The build-out is done. He paused. I need someone to manage it. Emily looked at him. I'm a waitress, she said. You're a person who documented 14 months of financial fraud, identified the structural weakness that allowed it, managed witness protection procedures without formal training, maintained the function of a diner through a complete management transition, and is currently studying business administration in the evenings, he said. You're also the most operationally aware person I've seen in a service environment in 20 years. He met her eyes. I'm offering you a management position, real salary, benefits, full authority over your floor. Emily put the cloth down. Why me, she asked, not deflecting, an actual question. Because you understand what it costs the people on the floor, he said. You've been the person on the floor. You know what fair management looks like, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. That is almost impossible to train into someone. You either have it or you don't. He paused. You have it. I'm in the middle of school, she said. Evening classes, he said. I know, the schedule is compatible. I've already looked. She stared at him. You've already looked. I was fairly confident you'd consider it seriously, he said. Not arrogantly, accurately. I didn't want to waste your time with an offer that had structural problems. And if I say no, she asked, then I find someone else and you keep waiting tables, he said, which you're excellent at and I respect entirely and which is a completely legitimate choice. He paused. But I don't think you're going to say no. Emily looked at the counter. She thought about Professor Marsh saying, don't stay there. She thought about Sandra on the sidewalk after class talking about the dental office she was going to own someday. She thought about Jorge's serious eyes and his decided expression and the moment he had chosen to be a certain kind of person. She thought about the coffee tin on the kitchen shelf. I have conditions, she said. I expected conditions, he said. Maria, Emily said. I want her given the option of a senior position if she wants it, not as a favor, as a recognition of what she's worth. She's been undervalued since before I got there. Done, he said. Full transparency on accounts, Emily said. I see everything. Same audit access Diana has. Obviously, he said, if I find something wrong, I document it and bring it to you directly. Not to a middleman, to you. That's how I'd want it, he said. And if we disagree about something, a decision, a policy, anything on the floor, I tell you directly and you don't manage around me. He looked at her for a moment. I told you I'd try, he said. I'm still trying. That's the honest answer. I know, she said. That's why that condition is on the list instead of being a deal breaker. She paused. And my father, he's going to need ongoing follow-up appointments. The schedule has to accommodate that. It does, Vincent said, without question. Emily looked at the counter. She looked at the diner, the tables, the coffee stations, the bell above the door, the corner booth. She thought about the night she had cried on the kitchen floor and the man who had followed the sound of it and what had come from that. Not what she had expected, not what she would have designed, something more complicated and more real. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He extended his hand. She shook it. His handshake was firm and brief, the handshake of someone who considered it binding. She let go and picked up the cloth and went back to wiping the counter. Because the diner was still open, and there were still tables, and the work was still the work. She heard him put money on the counter, coffee, plus something extra, the same as always. And she heard him stand, and she heard his footsteps toward the door. Vincent, she said. He stopped. She didn't look up from the counter. The accountant, she said. The one who told you the truth about your son. Did you ever thank her? A pause. I gave her a raise, he said. That's not the same as thanking her, Emily said. A longer pause. No, he said quietly. It isn't. You might want to do that, Emily said. If you haven't. She heard the door open. The bell rang. I'll think about it, he said. Think faster, she said. People don't wait around forever for you to get around to them. The door closed. Maria appeared from the back, where she had clearly been, close enough to hear at least part of the conversation. Did you just give Vincent Moretti personal advice and then tell him to hurry up? Maria said. I told him to think faster, Emily said. There's a difference. Maria stared at her for a full 3 seconds. Then she started laughing, not politely, genuinely the laugh of someone who finds something funny all the way down. I need you to know, Maria said, that you are the most terrifying person I have ever met in the best possible way. I'm going to need a senior position from you in the South End location, Emily said. If you want it. Maria stopped laughing. She looked at Emily. Real position, she said. Real position, Emily said. Real salary, real authority. You'd run the floor under me. Under you, Maria said slowly. You're taking management. Starting in January, Emily said. Maria was very still for a moment. Emily could see her running the numbers, the kids, the schedule, the math of what a real salary versus tips meant over a year. She could see the moment the math resolved. Yes, Maria said, simply and completely. Good, Emily said. Now let's finish this shift. They worked the rest of the evening, side by side, the way they had been working for years, except that now the shape of the future was different. The same work, the same floor, the same coffee that came out slightly strong at the start of a new pot, but different in the way that things are different when you can see where they're going. Thomas Carter was discharged from his inpatient status in the 3rd week of December. His treatment would continue on an outpatient basis, scheduled appointments, a new normal that was better than the old one. Emily drove him home. She had taken a rideshare, the practical math of not owning a car in Boston, having not yet changed, but she was working on it, and she helped him up the stairs of his building and made him tea and sat at his kitchen table while he settled back into the particular pleasure of being in his own space. He looked around his apartment with the expression of someone seeing it fresh. 4 months, he said, almost, she said. A lot happened in 4 months, he said. A lot happened in one night, and she said, the rest was consequence. He looked at her. You going to be okay with all of it? The new job, the school, he gestured vaguely at the general shape of her changed life. I don't know, she said honestly. I'm going to find out. That's my girl, he said. She went home in the early evening, and the city was doing what it did in December, cold and bright, the lights coming on early, the particular compressed energy of a place about to tip from one year into another. She walked the 4 blocks from the bus stop to her building with her hands in her pockets and her face in the cold air, and she thought about everything. She thought about the woman she had been 11 weeks ago, the woman who cried on a kitchen floor, who kept a notebook under her mattress, who had made a calculation about what she could afford to lose and had decided again and again that who she was not on the table. She thought about that woman with something that was not pity and was not pride exactly, but was the specific regard you have for a version of yourself that carried something heavy for a long time without anyone watching. She thought about everything that had come from one honest conversation in a kitchen at 1 a.m. Her father was home. Her father was responding. The word the doctor used was responding, and she turned it over in her mind the way you turn over something valuable. The specific living present tense of it. Not recovered. Responding. Still in it, still fighting, but fighting in the right direction. The notebook that had lived under her mattress was now in Graham's legal files, permanently documented, permanently part of the record. Rick Dawson was facing charges. Gerald Fossey was cooperating with people who had resources he did not. Maria was going to run a floor. Jorge was going to study business administration and learn to see the gaps. And Emily Carter, who had spent 27 years being told by the world in 100 different languages that she was too much and not enough, simultaneously too visible in her body and too invisible in her worth. Emily Carter was going to manage a restaurant in the South End and take business law in the spring and put her coffee tin on her kitchen shelf as a monument to the specific kind of stubbornness that keeps records when no one else will. She climbed 4 flights of stairs. She unlocked her door. She went inside. She stood in her kitchen and looked at the coffee tin on the shelf, and she thought about the $50 bill placed under a saucer by a man who couldn't sleep, and the first bill she had put in the tin, after that $28 in tips from that same night, the ones Rick hadn't gotten to, and she thought about the math of it, the long, patient math of small amounts adding up to something that holds the line. She had held the line. Not because she was fearless. Not because she was powerful. Not because anyone had been watching or would have known if she stopped. She had held the line because the alternative was letting go of who she was, and she had never been willing to pay that price. She put the kettle on. She sat down at her kitchen table. She opened her business administration textbook to the chapter she had marked. Outside her window, Boston made its usual sounds, the traffic, the voices, the particular hum of a city that never entirely stopped. And Emily Carter sat inside all of it, present and prepared, and completely irrevocably herself, ready for everything that came next. She was no longer the woman the world had overlooked. She was the woman who had made the world pay attention, not by becoming something different, not by shrinking herself into something more acceptable, but by being exactly who she had always been, with the full and uncompromising weight of everything that meant. And that, in the end, was the only victory that had ever been worth counting.